This secret's carved into my flesh. A dark romance novel. Prologue. The first thing Elara noticed was the light. Not natural light, nothing warm or golden or kind. This was the brutal fluorescence of a medical facility, the kind that bleached color from the world and left everything flat and sterile. It pressed against her eyelids like an accusation. The second thing was the restraints. Soft, padded cuffs circled her wrists and ankles, fastened to a bed she didn't recognize, not tight enough to hurt, but firm enough to mean something. She pulled against them reflexively, and pain shot through her arms, not from the restraints, but from inside her own body, like her nerves were learning to scream in a language she didn't understand. What? Memory came in fragments. The translation project. The pharmaceutical documents she'd been working on late into the night, converting dense medical terminology from German to English. Words that had seemed routine at first. Clinical trials, test subjects, proprietary gene therapy protocols. And then the words that weren't routine at all. Unauthorized human experimentation, subject compliance achieved through coercion, survival rate 43%. She'd made the mistake of asking questions, of sending an email to the client, politely requesting clarification on certain terms that seemed concerning. She'd made the mistake of not realizing who she was working for. After that, the memories dissolved into darkness, a hand over her mouth. Chemical sweetness forcing its way into her lungs, the world tilting sideways. And now, this. Elara forced her eyes fully open, fighting against the sluggish weight of whatever sedative still lingered in her system. The room came into focus slowly. White walls, medical equipment she didn't recognize, screens displaying data that might have been her own vital signs. An IV stand beside the bed, feeding something clear into her left arm. No windows. One door, closed. She was alone. No. The shadow in the corner moved. Elara's breath caught, her body tensed, fresh pain sparking along her spine, her ribs, the soft tissue of her throat. Everything hurt in ways that felt wrong, like her nervous system had been rewired while she slept. The man stepped into the light with the slow deliberation of someone who knew he had all the time in the world. He was tall, built like violence, wrapped in expensive tailoring, dark suit, no tie, the kind of precise grooming that suggested control in every aspect of his life. His face was sharp-planed and handsome, in a way that felt dangerous, the kind of beauty that belonged to predators. Dark hair, darker eyes, mid-30s, maybe. Old enough to have done terrible things and learned not to flinch. But it was his stillness that frightened her most. He didn't move like other people. Every gesture was measured, economical, as if he'd learned to eliminate anything unnecessary from his existence. He stopped at the foot of her bed and regarded her with the clinical interest of a scientist examining a specimen. "You're awake." His voice was low, accented. Eastern European, she thought, though softened by years of speaking English. "Good. The sedatives were calculated for your body weight, but we weren't certain how the modifications would affect metabolism." Modifications. The word hit her like a fist. "What did you do to me?" Her voice came out raw, barely above a whisper. Her throat felt like she'd been screaming, though she had no memory of it. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the side of the bed, his gaze traveling over her with detached assessment. Not sexual, clinical, like she was a puzzle he'd already solved. "What was necessary?" he said, finally. Elara jerked against the restraints, ignoring the way her body shrieked in protest. "Let me go. Let me go." "I can't do that." "The hell you can't. You saw the documents." He said it calmly, as if they were discussing the weather. "You read them. You asked questions. That made you a liability." "So you kidnapped me?" The fear was burning into rage now, hot and bright and desperate. "You had no right." "I had every right." He leaned down, bracing one hand against the bed rail, bringing his face level with hers. Up close, she could see the faint scar along his jawline, the too precise symmetry of someone who'd learned to school every expression. The research you were translating belongs to me. The facility, the doctors, the subjects, all of it. You weren't just translating words, Miss Voss. You were reading a record of my life's work. Her breath came short and fast. Then you're a monster. Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, but something colder. Recognition, maybe. Or agreement. Perhaps, he said softly. But now, so are you. The words didn't make sense. Elara shook her head, tried to pull away, but there was nowhere to go. What are you talking about? Instead of answering, he straightened and rolled up his right sleeve with practiced efficiency. The scars started at his wrist. They weren't the rough, chaotic marks of injury or self-harm. These were precise, thin white lines forming a pattern, almost geometric, running up the inside of his forearm and disappearing beneath the fabric. Like someone had taken a scalpel and carved a map into his skin. Elara stared, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. The same procedure that was performed on me 15 years ago, he said, his tone still maddeningly calm, was performed on you 3 days ago. Gene therapy, neurological enhancement, accelerated cellular regeneration. You'll heal faster than normal humans. Your reflexes will sharpen. Your senses will become more acute. He paused, and for the first time, something almost human entered his expression. You'll also experience chronic pain, episodes of neurological distress, insomnia, sensory overload. A dozen other side effects were still cataloging. Elara's pulse hammered in her ears. You're lying. Look at your arms. She didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at her not to look, to keep her eyes on him, to stay angry instead of afraid. But her gaze dropped anyway. The same scars, the same white lines, still pink at the edges, freshly healed, running up both forearms in patterns that matched his exactly. No, this isn't real, she whispered. This can't be. It's real. He rolled his sleeve back down, refastening the cuff with meticulous care. I didn't choose you out of cruelty, Miss Voss. I chose you because you were already dead the moment you asked those questions. My people would have eliminated you within 48 hours. I simply repurposed the situation. Repurposed. The word came out strangled. You turned me into some kind of experiment. I gave you a chance to survive. His voice hardened, just slightly. The survival rate for the initial procedure is 43%. You lived. That makes you valuable. I don't want to be valuable to you. She was shouting now, or trying to, her voice breaking. I want you to undo this, fix it, change me back. There is no going back. The finality in those words was worse than anything else he'd said. Elara felt something crack inside her chest, something that might have been hope or sanity or the last shred of who she'd been 3 days ago. Tears burned hot behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall, refused to give him that. The man watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something she didn't expect. He pulled up a chair and sat down beside the bed, close enough that she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, close enough to look almost human. I know what you're feeling, he said quietly. The violation, the rage, the grief for the person you were. I remember all of it. You don't know anything about me. I know more than you think. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. You're 27. You live alone. You work freelance because you don't trust institutions, don't like being controlled. You're brilliant, stubborn, and you've spent your entire adult life trying to stay invisible, because safety, for you, has always meant not being noticed. Elara's breath hitched. Every word was true, and she hated that he knew it. I chose you, he continued, because I saw something in your file, in the way you worked, the way you lived. You reminded me of who I was before all of this, someone who still had a choice. And you took that choice away from me. Yes, no hesitation, no apology. I did. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely between them. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost gentle, though the words were anything but. You'll hate me. That's fine. I've been hated by better people than you. But whether you accept it or not, we're the same now, Miss Voss. You and I are the only two people in the world who carry these modifications in our bodies, the only two who know what it feels like. He reached out slowly, giving her time to flinch away, but she was too stunned to move. His fingers brushed the scar on her left wrist, feather-light. "You're not my prisoner," he said. "You're my mirror." Then he stood, smoothed his jacket, and walked toward the door. Elara found her voice as his hand touched the handle. "Wait." He paused, glancing back. "What's your name?" The corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Konstantin," he said. "But you can call me Kos. Everyone does." The door closed behind him with a soft final click. And Elara was alone again, staring at the scars on her arms, scars that matched his, mark for mark, and feeling the slow, terrible weight of understanding settle over her. He was right. There was no going back. Chapter 1. The Cage. Elara woke to silence. Not the peaceful kind, the suffocating kind, the kind that pressed against her eardrums and made her hyper-aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every microscopic sound her body made against the sheets. The restraints were gone. She sat up slowly, testing her limbs. Her arms moved freely, though the motion sent fresh waves of that strange electric pain coursing through her nerves. Like her body was learning a new language and screaming the alphabet at her. The room was exactly as it had been when Kos left, sterile, white, clinical. But now the door stood open. An invitation, or a test. Elara swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet touching cool tile. She was still wearing the hospital gown they'd dressed her in, thin fabric that did nothing to ward off the chill. Or maybe the chill was coming from inside her. She couldn't tell anymore. She stood, bracing herself against the bed frame as her legs threatened to buckle. Everything felt wrong, too sensitive, too alive, like someone had turned up the volume on her entire nervous system and forgotten to give her the controls. "Walk," she told herself. "Just walk." She made it 3 steps before her knees gave out. The floor rushed up to meet her, but her hands shot out faster than they should have, faster than was possible, and caught her weight. She stayed there, palms flat against the tile, breathing hard. What did he do to me? The scars on her forearms caught her attention again. White lines, precise and deliberate, forming patterns she didn't understand. Medical, maybe. Or ritualistic. She didn't know which was worse. She forced herself upright and tried again, slower this time, 1 foot in front of the other. Her body obeyed, though it felt like piloting a machine she didn't know how to operate. The door led to a hallway, empty, wide, lined with more closed doors. No windows. Recessed lighting that hummed just loud enough to set her teeth on edge. Everything was too clean, too expensive. This wasn't a hospital. This was something else. A prison disguised as luxury. Elara moved forward, trailing one hand along the wall for balance. Her fingertips registered every microscopic texture in the paint, every imperfection. It was overwhelming. She pulled her hand back, curling it into a fist. At the end of the hallway, the space opened into what could only be described as a penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Finally, windows, overlooking a city she recognized. The skyline was unmistakable, even from this height. She was still in the same city. Still close to home. Close to a life she'd never get back. The penthouse was obscenely beautiful. Modern furniture, all clean lines and muted colors. A kitchen that looked like it had never been used. Art on the walls. Real art, the kind that cost more than her annual rent. Everything perfectly curated, perfectly controlled. Just like him. "You're faster than I expected." Elara spun, her body moving before her brain caught up. The sudden motion sent her stumbling, and she caught herself against the back of a leather sofa. Kos stood in the entrance to another hallway, dressed differently now. Dark jeans, black shirt, no jacket, more casual but no less dangerous. He held a tablet in one hand, his attention split between her and whatever data scrolled across the screen. "Your reaction time has already improved by 32%, he continued, as if they were discussing the weather. "Proprioception is still adjusting, but that's normal. It took me 6 weeks to stop falling over." Elara found her voice, though it came out rougher than she wanted. "Where am I?" "My home." He tapped something on the tablet, then set it on a side table. "Or one of them. This building is secure. No one comes in or out without my knowledge. So I'm a prisoner. You're recovering." He moved toward her with that same unnerving stillness, each step deliberate. "There's a difference." "No, there isn't." She straightened, ignoring the way her legs still shook. "You drugged me. You cut me open. You changed me without my permission. That's not recovery. That's torture." Something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, maybe recognition. "You're angry," he said simply. "Of course I'm angry." The words exploded out of her, sharp and ragged. "What did you expect? That I'd just accept this? Thank you for violating every inch of my body?" Ghost stopped a few feet away, his gaze steady on hers. "No, I expected exactly this." The calmness in his voice made her want to scream. Or cry. Or both. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt in the thin hospital gown. "I want my clothes." "You can have them when you're stable enough to leave this floor." "I want to leave now." "No." The single word hit like a wall. Final. Absolute. Elara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You can't keep me here." "I can." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "And I will. Until you understand what you are now." "I know what I am." Her voice broke, just slightly. "I'm your experiment." "You're my mirror," he corrected, and there was something almost gentle in his tone. "I told you that already." "Stop saying that." She took a shaky step back, her spine hitting the sofa. "We're not the same. I didn't choose this." "Neither did I." The words hung between them, heavy with implications she didn't want to unpack. Koss moved past her, heading toward the kitchen. She watched him warily, half expecting him to grab her, restrain her, drag her back to that sterile room. But he didn't. He simply opened one of the pristine cabinets and pulled out 2 glasses. "You need to eat," he said, filling both glasses with water from a filtered tap, "and hydrate. Your metabolism is running faster than normal. You'll feel like you're starving for the first few weeks." As if on cue, Elara's stomach cramped painfully. She hadn't thought about food since waking up, but now that he'd mentioned it, the hunger hit her like a fist. She said nothing. Koss turned, holding out one of the glasses. When she didn't take it, he set it on the counter between them. "I'm not going to force you," he said quietly, "but your body needs fuel, Elara. Fight me all you want, but don't fight yourself." She hated that he was right. Hated the way he said her name. Not cruel, not possessive, just factual. Like he already knew her better than she knew herself. After a long moment, she reached for the glass. The water was cold, clean, perfect. She drank half of it in one go, and the relief was immediate. Her body seemed to sigh in gratitude, some of the tension easing from her muscles. Koss watched her with that same clinical interest, but underneath it she thought she saw something else. Satisfaction, maybe, or approval. "Good girl," he murmured. The words sent a jolt through her, part anger, part something she refused to name. "Don't!" she snapped, slamming the glass down harder than necessary. "Don't talk to me like I'm a dog you're training." His expression didn't change. "I'm not. I'm acknowledging progress." "I don't want your acknowledgement. I want to go home." "You don't have a home anymore." The bluntness of it was almost kind compared to a lie. "The moment you translated those documents, your old life ended. The people I work for, the people who funded this research, they don't leave loose ends. If I hadn't taken you, they would have killed you. Quietly, efficiently. No one would have noticed you were gone." Elara's throat tightened. "You're lying." "I don't lie." He picked up his own glass. studying her over the rim. "I don't need to. The truth is brutal enough." She wanted to argue, to scream that he was wrong, that someone would have noticed, would have cared. Her landlord, her clients, someone. But the truth, the real truth, was that he was probably right. She'd spent her entire adult life making herself invisible, small, unnoticed. It was safer that way. And now, that safety had made her the perfect victim. Kos set his glass down and moved toward her again, slowly, giving her time to bolt if she wanted to. But Elara held her ground, even as her pulse hammered. He stopped just close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to see the faint shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He looked tired, human. It would be easier if he didn't. "I'm going to show you something," he said, "and you're not going to like it." Before she could respond, he reached for the hem of his shirt and pulled it over his head in one smooth motion. Elara's breath caught. The scars didn't stop at his forearms. They continued up his biceps, across his shoulders, down his chest in intricate, deliberate patterns. Some were thin white lines. Others were darker, raised, like the tissue had tried to heal itself wrong. There were marks near his ribs that looked surgical, burned scars along his collarbone, a patchwork of violence mapped across his skin. 15 years old, Kos said, his voice flat. That's when they started. 3 years of trial and error before they got the formula stable enough that I didn't die from organ failure. Elara couldn't look away, couldn't speak. 47 other subjects went through the program before me, he continued. 46 died. I survived because I was stubborn, or unlucky. I'm still not sure which. He turned slightly, showing her his back. It was worse. Surgical scars ran the length of his spine, crisscrossing like railroad tracks. Burn marks peppered his shoulder blades. There were places where the skin looked almost translucent, stretched too thin over bone and muscle. "They didn't sedate me for most of it," he said, almost conversationally. "They wanted to see how the modifications affected pain tolerance, how long a subject could stay conscious during extreme trauma." Elara's stomach turned. When he faced her again, his expression was unreadable. "So, when I say we're the same, I don't mean it lightly. I know what it feels like to wake up and realize your body isn't yours anymore. To know that someone took your choices away and turned you into something you never wanted to be." She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "Then why would you do it to someone else?" For the first time since she'd met him, something cracked in Kos's carefully controlled mask. Pain. Real, raw pain. "Because I wanted to see if it was possible," he said quietly, "to survive it and still be human." His hand lifted, hovering near her face but not touching. "You reminded me of who I was before all of this. Before I became this." He gestured vaguely at himself, at the scars, at whatever darkness lived inside him. "I wanted to see if you'd do better, if you'd stay whole." Elara's eyes burned with unshed tears. "That's insane." Yes. He didn't deny it, didn't apologize. It is. And somehow, that honesty was worse than any lie he could have told. She turned away from him, wrapping her arms around herself again. The hunger was still there, gnawing at her insides. The pain was still there, sparking through her nerves. Everything was still wrong. But now she understood something she hadn't before. Kos wasn't just her captor. He was the only person in the world who knew exactly what she was going through. And she hated him for it almost as much as she needed it. "There's food in the refrigerator," Kos said behind her, pulling his shirt back on. "Eat, rest, get stronger. We'll talk more tomorrow." "I don't want to talk to you tomorrow." "I know." His footsteps moved toward the hallway he'd emerged from. "Do it anyway." Elara didn't turn around, didn't watch him leave. She just stood there, alone in the too beautiful prison, staring at the scars on her arms. "We're the same now." She closed her eyes. God, she hoped he was wrong. Chapter 2. Shared Symptoms. 3 days passed. Elara counted them by the shift in light beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Morning bled into afternoon, afternoon into dusk, dusk into the kind of darkness that pressed against the glass like a living thing. She watched the city lights flicker on, thousands of tiny promises of normal lives being lived by people who still owned their own bodies. She didn't sleep much. When she tried, the pain came. Sharp, electric jolts that raced through her nervous system like lightning strikes, each one powerful enough to jolt her back to consciousness. Her body seemed determined to remind her that it wasn't hers anymore, that someone else had rewritten the code, and now she was just along for the ride. Koss had been right about the hunger. She ate constantly, devouring everything in the pristine kitchen with a desperation that should have embarrassed her. It didn't. She was too busy trying to survive each moment to care about dignity. He didn't come back. Not once in 3 days. Elara told herself she was relieved, that his absence gave her time to think, to plan, to figure out some way to escape this beautiful prison. But the truth she hated, was that the penthouse felt emptier without him, which was insane. He'd violated her, turned her into an experiment, taken away every choice she'd ever had. And yet, when the pain hit hardest in the middle of the night, when her nerves screamed and her vision blurred and she couldn't tell if she was dying or just becoming something new, she found herself wishing he was there. Because he would know what to do. Because he'd survived this. Because he's the only one who understands. Elara shoved the thought away and forced herself to eat another protein bar. Her fourth of the day. The wrapper crinkled too loudly in her hypersensitive fingers, and she had to resist the urge to throw it across the room just to hear something break. That's when the door opened. She turned, her body moving faster than her brain could process, and nearly stumbled over her own feet. The modifications were getting stronger. She could feel it, the way her reflexes sharpened, the way her senses expanded. It should have felt like power. It felt like losing herself. Koss stood in the doorway, dressed in what she was starting to recognize as his uniform. Dark clothes, perfect tailoring, that same unnerving stillness. He held a black duffel bag in one hand and a tablet in the other. His eyes found hers immediately. "You haven't been sleeping," he said. Not a question. Elara crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly aware that she was still wearing the oversized shirt he'd left for her 3 days ago. Nothing else. "How would you know?" He moved into the room, setting the duffel on the counter and the tablet beside it. "The monitors in your room track vitals, heart rate, respiration, REM cycles." He glanced at her. "You've averaged less than 2 hours per night." "You're monitoring me?" The violation shouldn't have surprised her. Nothing should surprise her anymore, but anger flared hot in her chest anyway. "I'm tracking your recovery." His tone was maddeningly clinical. "There's a difference." "No, there isn't." Something flickered across his face. Too fast to read. He turned his attention to the duffel, unzipping it with precise movements. "The pain has been worse at night." Again, not a question. Elara's jaw tightened. "What do you care?" "I care because if your nervous system doesn't stabilize, you'll experience permanent damage." He pulled items from the bag, medical supplies, she realized. Sterile packages, vials, equipment she didn't recognize, which would make this entire process pointless. God forbid your experiment fails. Koss's hands stilled. When he looked at her again, there was something darker in his eyes, something that looked almost like hurt, though she knew that couldn't be right. Men like him didn't get hurt. "Come here," he said quietly. "No." "Elara," her name again, soft and commanding at once. "I can help with the pain, but you have to let me." She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him to go to hell, to take his modifications and his clinical detachment and choke on them. But another wave of that electric agony chose that moment to spike through her spine, and she gasped, her knees buckling. Koss was there before she hit the ground. His hands caught her upper arms, steadying her, and the contact sent a different kind of shock through her system. Not pain, something else. something that made her breath hitch for entirely different reasons. "I've got you," he murmured, his voice close to her ear. "Breathe." "I am breathing," she managed through gritted teeth. "No, you're hyperventilating." His grip shifted, one hand moving to the back of her neck, fingers finding pressure points she didn't know existed. "Focus on my voice. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Elara wanted to argue, but the pain was too much. She let him guide her, matching her breathing to his rhythm. And slowly, impossibly, the agony began to ease. Not disappear, just settle, like a fire banking down to coals. "How?" she whispered, her body sagging against his without permission. "There are patterns," Kos explained, his fingers still working those pressure points with professional precision. "Neurological pathways the modifications create. If you know where they are, you can interrupt the pain signals, temporarily." He guided her to the couch, helping her sit. Elara was too exhausted to protest. She slumped against the leather, her breathing still shaky but steadier than it had been in days. Kos knelt in front of her, bringing them eye level. This close, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension lines bracketing his mouth. He looked tired, human. "I'm going to teach you," he said, "how to manage the episodes, how to work with the modifications instead of against them. But first, I need to examine you." Elara's pulse jumped. "Examine?" "Your vitals, the integration sites. There are," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "There are complications that can arise in the first few weeks. I need to make sure you're healing properly." "You mean you need to make sure your experiment isn't dying?" His jaw tightened. Yes. At least he was honest. Elara looked away, staring at the city lights beyond the windows. Normal people, living normal lives. People who still belong to themselves. "Will it ever stop?" she asked quietly. "The pain?" Kos was silent for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "It gets better, manageable, but it never completely stops." She closed her eyes. "Of course it didn't." "I've lived with it for 15 years, he continued, his voice softer now. "I've learned to function, more than function. You will too." "I don't want to learn to function with this." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "I want it gone. I want to go back." "There is no going back, Elara." The gentleness in his tone made it worse somehow. "I'm sorry, but there isn't." Tears burned behind her eyes. She refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. Not when he was the reason they existed in the first place. Kos stood, moving to the medical supplies he'd brought. When he returned, he had a small device in his hand. Something that looked like a scanner crossed with a stethoscope. "This will track the neural integration," he explained, holding it up so she could see. "It won't hurt, but I need you to stay still." Elara's hands clenched into fists on her thighs. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run, to fight. But another part of her, the part that was starting to understand just how trapped she really was, knew it wouldn't matter. She could fight him all she wanted. She was still his. "Fine," she whispered. Kos's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. Just slightly. "Thank you." He moved behind the couch, and Elara felt his presence like a weight at her back. The device hummed to life, and then his fingers were in her hair, gently moving it aside to expose her neck. The first touch of the scanner made her flinch. "I know," Kos murmured. "Your sensory processing is heightened. Everything feels more intense right now. It will stabilize." "When?" "Another few weeks." "Weeks." Elara bit down on the inside of her cheek as he moved the scanner along her spine, down to her shoulders, across the scars on her arms. Each point of contact sent ripples of sensation through her. Not quite pain, but not pleasure either, just overwhelming. "The integration is progressing faster than expected," Kos said, almost to himself. "Your body is adapting well." "Lucky me." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. Dry. Humorless. "Yes, lucky you." The scanner moved to her wrist, and Kos's other hand caught hers, turning it palm up. His thumb brushed over the scars there, those precise white lines that matched his exactly. Elara's breath caught. It was the first time he'd touched her without a clinical purpose. The contact was gentle, almost reverent. "I remember when they did mine," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. "I was awake for most of it. They wanted to document my responses. Every cut, every injection, every moment of—" He stopped, cleared his throat. When he spoke again, his voice was back to its usual controlled tone. "The point is, I know what you're going through, every stage of it, and I know how to help you survive it." Elara pulled her hand away, tucking it against her chest. "Why? Why what? Why help me? Why teach me?" She turned on the couch to face him. "You got what you wanted. I'm your mirror now, right? You're proof that this process can work. So why do you care if I suffer through it?" Kos held her gaze for a long moment. Then he did something she didn't expect. He rolled up his sleeves, exposing those patchwork scars again, and held out his arm next to hers. The patterns matched perfectly, mirror images carved into flesh. "Because," he said softly, "no one helped me, no one explained, no one gave me tools to cope. I learned everything through trial and error, and some of those errors nearly killed me." His fingers traced the scar on her wrist again so lightly she almost couldn't feel it. "I won't let that happen to you." Elara's throat tightened. She wanted to hate him. She did hate him. But this unexpected mercy, this strange, twisted care, made everything more complicated. "You don't get to be the hero," she whispered. "You're the villain of this story, Kos. You did this to me." "I know." No argument, no defense, just acceptance. "I know exactly what I am, Elara. But that doesn't change the fact that you're stuck with me. And I'm the only chance you have of making it through this intact." He was right, and she hated him for it. Another spike of pain jolted through her, and this time Kos didn't wait for permission. His hands found her shoulders, his fingers locating those pressure points again with practiced ease. The relief was immediate. Elara's head fell forward, her breathing stuttering as the agony ebbed. She felt Kos shift closer, his presence solid and warm at her back. "I'm going to show you how to do this yourself," he said, his voice low and calm. "But for now, just breathe. Let me handle it." And God help her, she did. She let him ease the pain, let his hands work their strange magic on her nervous system, let herself lean back against him just slightly, seeking the relief only he could provide. They stayed like that until the episode passed. When Elara finally opened her eyes, she found Kos watching her in the reflection of the darkened windows. His expression was unreadable, but his hands remained gentle on her shoulders. "Better?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Kos pulled back slowly, giving her space. He returned to the medical supplies, organizing them with meticulous care. "The episodes will be worse for the next week. After that, they'll start to space out. Eventually, you'll be able to predict them." How comforting. "It's all I can offer." He glanced at her over his shoulder. "I'm not a good man, Elara. I won't pretend to be. But I will keep you alive. And I will teach you everything I know about surviving this." Elara pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "Why did you really choose me?" Kos went still. "You said I reminded you of who you were before," she continued. "But that's not all of it, is it?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, "No, it's not." "So tell me the truth." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw something raw in his eyes, something that looked like regret. "I chose you," he said quietly, "because I saw myself in you. And I wanted to know if it was possible, if someone could go through this and come out the other side, still human, still themselves." "That's what I said." "No," he shook his head. "I didn't choose you to see if you could survive it better than I did. I chose you to see if I'd been wrong all along. If maybe," his voice cracked, just slightly, "if maybe the problem wasn't the process, maybe the problem was me." Elara stared at him, her heart pounding. I needed to know, Goss finished, if this thing inside us, these modifications, this pain, this violation, if it destroys everyone, or if I was just too broken to begin with. The confession hung between them, raw and terrible. Elara didn't know what to say, didn't know if there was anything to say. So she just sat there, hugging her knees, watching this dangerous man admit that he'd used her as proof of his own humanity, and hating herself for understanding why. Chapter 3. The Unspoken Contract. Elara woke to the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not the instant garbage she'd been surviving on for years. The scent pulled her from sleep like a hand reaching into dark water, and for one disoriented moment, she forgot where she was. Then her body reminded her. The pain came first, that now familiar electric buzz beneath her skin, like her nerves were singing a song only she could hear. Then the hypersensitivity, the scratch of expensive sheets against her legs, the whisper of air conditioning against her face, the almost painful brightness of morning light filtering through the windows. She sat up slowly, testing her body's cooperation. Better than yesterday, worse than she wanted. The oversized shirt she'd been wearing had ridden up in her sleep, and she tugged it down with clumsy fingers that still didn't quite feel like hers. Everything was too sharp, too immediate, like living with all her senses turned up to 11 and no way to adjust the volume. The coffee smell was coming from the kitchen. Elara's stomach twisted, not with hunger this time, but with something more complicated. Anticipation, maybe, or dread. She couldn't tell anymore. She found Kos standing at the counter, his back to her. No jacket today, just dark jeans and a black t-shirt that showed off the lean muscle of his shoulders. His hair was slightly damp, like he'd recently showered. The domesticity of the image was jarring. Monsters weren't supposed to make coffee. "You're awake earlier than usual," he said without turning around. "Your sleep patterns are improving. Stop monitoring me." "I will when you're stable." He poured coffee into 2 mugs, white ceramic, expensive looking, and finally turned to face her. His eyes did that thing they always did, cataloging, assessing, reading her like data on one of his screens. "How's the pain?" "Manageable." It was a lie. Her spine felt like someone had replaced her vertebrae with live wires. But admitting weakness to him felt dangerous in ways she couldn't articulate. Kos's mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close, like he knew exactly what she wasn't saying. "Liar," he said mildly, and held out one of the mugs. Elara didn't move. "I don't want your coffee." "You do. Your body is craving caffeine. Increased metabolism means increased consumption of everything." He kept the mug extended, patient, waiting. "Take it, Elara. This doesn't have to be a battle." "Everything with you is a battle." "Only because you insist on fighting." His tone held no judgment, just observation. "I'm not your enemy right now. The pain is." He was right, and she hated him for it. Elara crossed the distance between them and took the mug. Their fingers brushed. Barely. Just for a second. And that strange electric sensation sparked between them again. Not pain. Something else. She pulled back quickly, cradling the mug against her chest. The warmth bled through the ceramic, grounding her. Kos watched her take the first sip, and something in his expression softened when she closed her eyes involuntarily at the taste. It was perfect. Of course it was perfect. "There's food in the refrigerator," he said, moving past her toward the windows. "You should eat before we start." Elara's eyes snapped open. "Start what?" "Your training." The word sent a chill down her hypersensitive spine. "I'm not training for anything." "You are." Kos turned, backlit by the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling glass. It made him look almost ethereal, almost not dangerous. "You need to learn how to control what's happening to your body, how to manage the pain, harness the enhancements, function in the world with these modifications." "I don't want to function with them. I want them gone. And I've told you that's not possible." No apology in his voice, just fact. "So you have 2 choices. Learn to live with this, or let it destroy you. I'm offering you the first option." Elara set the coffee mug down on the counter with more force than necessary. You don't get to offer me anything. You took everything from me. I know. Still, no defense. No justification. But that doesn't change where we are now. She wanted to scream. To throw something. To make him feel even a fraction of the violation she felt every time she looked at the scars on her arms. Instead, she took a breath and forced her voice steady. What kind of training? Kuss studied her for a long moment, and she could almost see him calculating, weighing her anger against her need, her pride against her survival instinct. Physical, mostly, he said finally. Your body is capable of things you haven't discovered yet. Faster reflexes, enhanced strength, accelerated healing. But right now, you're fighting against it instead of working with it. That's why you keep falling. Why simple movements feel wrong. Because they are wrong. This isn't my body anymore. It is. He moved toward her again, stopping just outside her personal space. Close, but not threatening. It's still yours, Elara. Just upgraded, whether you wanted it or not. The clinical language made her want to hit him. I also need to teach you the pressure points, he continued. The ones I've been using to manage your episodes. You should be able to do it yourself. Elara's hands clenched into fists. And if I refuse? Then you'll suffer more than necessary. Simple, brutal, true. I'm not going to force you to learn. But I'm also not going to watch you destroy yourself out of stubbornness. How noble of you. Something dark flickered in Kuss's eyes. I've never claimed to be noble. I'm offering you survival tools. What you do with them is your choice. Choice. The word was almost funny coming from him. Elara looked away, her gaze landing on the city beyond the windows. Somewhere out there, people were living normal lives. Going to work, drinking coffee in cafes, complaining about traffic, simple problems, human problems. She'd never be one of them again. The thought hit harder than any physical pain. Fine, she heard herself say, teach me. When she looked back, Kuss was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. Good, he said quietly. We'll start now. 20 minutes later, Elara stood in what she was beginning to think of as the training room. She hadn't noticed it during her initial exploration of the penthouse. The door had been closed, unmarked, easy to overlook. But now, standing in the middle of the space, she realized this was where Ko spent most of his time. The room was large, open, with the same floor-to-ceiling windows that seemed to be a theme in this place. But unlike the rest of the penthouse's pristine luxury, this space was functional. Brutal, even. One wall was lined with weapons, knives, batons, things she didn't have names for. Another held medical equipment, monitors, screens displaying data she didn't understand. The center of the room was empty, except for gym mats and what looked like a sparring area. And in the corner, barely visible in the shadows, was a hospital bed. Restraints hung loose from the frame. Elara's stomach turned. This is where they did it to you, she said, not a question. Kos followed her gaze to the bed. No, that happened in a facility about 200 miles from here. But I've recreated some elements for research. Research. The word tasted like ash. You mean for torturing other people? I mean for understanding what was done to us. His voice was tight now, controlled. I've spent 15 years trying to reverse engineer this process, to find a way to undo it. That bed is where I run experiments. On myself, Elara. Not others. She turned to face him. Until me. Until you. No denial. You're the first person I've subjected to this process since it was done to me. And you'll be the last. Why should I believe that? Kos moved past her, heading toward the medical wall. Because I'm not a scientist. I'm not building an army. I'm trying to understand what was done to us. So maybe I can find a way to make it stop. He picked up a tablet, swiping through screens. The people who created this program are dead now, most of them anyway. I've spent the last decade hunting them down, one by one, taking their research, their data, their lives. Elara's breath caught. You killed them. Yes, no hesitation. Every single one who participated willingly. The ones who knew what they were doing to children and didn't care. His eyes met hers, cold and empty. I'm a monster, Elara. I've never pretended otherwise. But I'm a monster they created. The confession should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something dangerously close to understanding. The people who funded your translation work, Kos continued, setting the tablet down, they were trying to restart the program, new subjects, new modifications. I couldn't let that happen. So you took me instead. So I saved you from being tortured to death in a black site facility and gave you a chance at survival. His voice hardened. I'm not asking you to thank me. I know what I did, but understand that the alternative was worse. Elara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the comfortable temperature. How do you know I would have ended up there? Because that's what they do with witnesses, with liabilities. He moved closer, his expression grim. You think you could have just walked away after seeing those documents? Gone back to your normal life? They would have found you within 48 hours. And what they would have done to you before you died. He stopped, jaw clenching. You're better off with me, he finished quietly. At least here, you're still alive. Still yourself, more or less. Still have a chance. A chance at what? Being your mirror? Your proof of concept? A chance at survival. Kos's hands clenched into fists at his sides. A chance at learning to control this instead of being controlled by it. A chance at... He cut himself off, turning away. Elara stared at his back, at the tension in his shoulders. For the first time, she saw past the clinical detachment to something rawer underneath. He was lonely. This powerful, dangerous man who'd violated her in every way that mattered. He was desperately, achingly alone. And he'd turned her into his mirror not just to prove she could survive. He'd done it so he wouldn't be the only monster in the world anymore. The realization should have made her hate him more. Instead, it just made everything more complicated. Show me, she said quietly. Kos turned, surprise flickering across his features. What? The training, the pressure points, whatever you think I need to survive this. She met his gaze, refusing to look away. Show me. For a long moment he just stared at her. Then, something in his expression shifted, relief mixed with something darker, something almost grateful. All right, he said, but this is going to hurt. Everything hurts now. Not like this. He moved to the center of the room, gesturing for her to join him on the mats. What I'm about to teach you requires pushing past pain, not avoiding it. Learning to function through it instead of fighting it. Elara followed him, her bare feet silent on the padded floor. I'm already in pain constantly. How is this different? Because right now, the pain controls you. Kos stopped in the center of the mat, turning to face her. After today, you'll control it. He held out his hand. Elara looked at it. Scarred, dangerous, the same hand that had performed surgery on her without consent. The hand that had also eased her pain, held her steady, offered her the only comfort she'd known in days. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. That electric sensation sparked again, stronger this time, and she saw his eyes widen slightly. He felt it too. The modifications create a kind of resonance, he said, his voice lower now, between people who share them. You'll feel it more strongly with me than you would with others, because we're the same, she finished. I know. Kos's grip tightened fractionally. Yes. The same. He pulled her closer, positioning her in front of him. Then his other hand came up to the back of her neck, fingers finding those pressure points he'd shown her before. Feel this, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Memorize where my fingers are. The exact placement, the amount of pressure. You'll need to be able to do this yourself when I'm not here. Elara's breath stuttered. His touch was clinical, professional, but the intimacy of it was undeniable. She could feel his heart beating against her back, steady and strong. Could smell whatever soap he used, something clean and sharp. Could feel, for the first time since waking up in this nightmare, something other than pain and fear. "Now," Kos said, his voice dropping even lower, "I'm going to trigger an episode, artificially, so you can learn what it feels like to fight through it instead of just enduring it." Elara's eyes widened. "What?" His fingers shifted, pressing different points, and suddenly her nervous system exploded. It was worse than any episode she'd had naturally. Fire raced through her veins, her vision whited out, and she would have collapsed if Kos's arm hadn't wrapped around her waist, holding her upright. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice cutting through the agony. "Focus on my voice. Find the pain and push through it." "I can't." "You can." His grip tightened, anchoring her. "Your body is designed for this now. Stop fighting it. Lean into it." It went against every instinct she had. But Elara was drowning in sensation, and his voice was the only lifeline she had. She stopped trying to pull away from the pain. She dove into it instead. And something inside her shifted. The pain didn't disappear, but it changed, transformed from something that controlled her into something she could use. Like a current she could ride instead of being swept away by. Her vision cleared, her breathing steadied. And when she opened her eyes, she saw the world differently. Sharper, brighter, more. "There," Kos breathed, and she felt his chest rise and fall against her back. "Now you understand." Elara turned in his arms and found him watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Pride, maybe, or recognition. "This is what it means," he said quietly, "to be what we are." And God help her, standing there in his arms with pain and power coursing through her in equal measure, Elara understood exactly what he meant. She was starting to become the monster he'd turned her into. And the worst part, the absolutely worst part, was that some small, dark piece of her didn't entirely hate it. Chapter 4. Breaking Point. The sessions became routine. Every morning, Elara woke to coffee already brewed. Every morning, Kos was waiting in the training room with that same controlled patience. And every morning, she learned a little more about what her body could do, what it had become. 2 weeks passed in a blur of pain and discovery. Kos taught her how to predict the episodes, the subtle shifts in her nervous system that signaled one was coming, how to use the pressure points to interrupt them, how to move with the modifications instead of against them. Her reflexes were faster now, fast enough that she'd accidentally shattered a glass just by gripping it too hard. Fast enough that when Kos threw a training knife at her head one morning, she'd caught it without thinking. The look on his face had been worth the terror. But it wasn't just physical training. Kos was teaching her the patterns, neurological pathways, he called them. The way the modifications rewired pain receptors, enhanced sensory processing, accelerated cellular regeneration. He showed her his own scans, pointing out the similarities between their neural maps. They were mirrors, just like he'd said. And that terrified her more than anything else. Because the more time she spent with him, the more she understood him. The clinical detachment was armor. The control was survival. He'd been turned into a weapon as a teenager and spent 15 years trying to prove he was still human underneath. She was starting to suspect he'd failed, and she was terrified she would too. "Again," Kos said, circling her on the training mat. Elara wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. They'd been at this for 2 hours, and her body was screaming. Not from the modifications, from simple exhaustion. "I need a break." "No, you don't." He moved with that predatory grace she'd learned to recognize, testing her reflexes. "Your stamina is triple what it was. You're stopping because you think you should, not because you need to." "Maybe I'm stopping because I want to." Kos's mouth quirked, almost a smile. "Want doesn't matter here." He struck without warning, a controlled blow aimed at her ribs. Elara blocked it on instinct, her arm moving faster than conscious thought. The impact sent a shock up her forearm, but it didn't hurt the way it should have. Her body absorbed it, adapted. "Better," Kos acknowledged, already moving for another strike. But you're still hesitating. Stop thinking. Just react. Elara ducked the next blow, then the next. Her body was learning the rhythm of this, the violent dance of attack and defense. Part of her hated how natural it was starting to feel. Another part of her felt alive for the first time since waking up in that medical suite. Koss increased the speed, and suddenly she was fighting for real. His strikes came faster, harder, forcing her to use everything he'd taught her. Block, dodge, counter. Her nervous system sang with the exertion, pain and pleasure blurring into something indistinguishable. She almost didn't see the sweep coming. Koss's leg hooked behind her knee, and suddenly she was falling. She hit the mat hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. Before she could recover, he was on top of her, one knee pinning her hip, his hands catching her wrists and pressing them to the floor above her head. They were both breathing hard. Elara stared up at him, her heart hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with the sparring. This close, she could see the flecks of gray in his dark eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the faint scar on his jaw, the one that curved just slightly when his expression shifted, which it was doing now. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. The grip on her wrists tightened fractionally. "You left yourself open," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "You cheated. There's no such thing as cheating in a real fight." But he didn't move, didn't release her. In a real situation, your opponent won't play fair. Elara was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, the weight of him pressing her into the mat, the way his chest rose and fall with each breath, close enough that she could feel it, the way her body was responding to his proximity in ways that had nothing to do with training. "Let me up," she said, but her voice came out breathless. Koss's eyes darkened. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because you're not fighting anymore." His gaze held hers, intense and searching. "You've been fighting me since the moment you woke up, but right now, you're not, and I want to know why." Elara's pulse jumped. "I'm pinned to the floor. What am I supposed to do?" "You could break this hold in 3 different ways with what I've taught you." His grip shifted, loosening just slightly, proving he knew it too. "But you're not trying, so I'm asking again, why?" The honest answer was too dangerous to speak. Because she was tired of fighting, tired of being angry every second of every day, tired of hating him when he was the only person in the world who understood what she was going through, tired of pretending that some dark, broken part of her didn't recognize something in him. "Maybe I'm just tired," she said instead. Koss studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he released her wrists and pushed himself up, offering his hand. Elara took it. She'd stopped refusing his help somewhere around day 5, and let him pull her to her feet. The momentum brought her closer than necessary, and for a heartbeat, they stood there, too close, not touching, but almost. "You're getting stronger," Koss said quietly. "Faster, better control. In another week, you'll be ready." Elara's stomach dropped. Ready for what? To leave this floor. He stepped back, putting professional distance between them again. "You can't stay locked in here forever. You need to learn how to function in the real world with these modifications." The thought of leaving the penthouse sent a jolt of something through her. Not quite fear. Not quite excitement. "Where would I go?" she asked. "You said I can't go back to my old life." "You can't." Koss moved toward the medical wall, pulling up data on one of the screens. "The people who funded that research are still looking for you. Going back to your apartment, your old clients, any of your previous contacts, it would put you in immediate danger. So I'm still a prisoner, just with a longer leash. You're under my protection." He glanced over his shoulder. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Elara crossed her arms over her chest. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks the same." Koss turned fully, and something in his expression shifted, hardened. "Would you prefer I turn you loose? Let you try to survive on your own with modifications you barely understand and enemies you don't even know you have?" "I'd prefer to have never been modified in the first place." "That's not an option." For the first time since she'd met him, Koss's control cracked. His voice rose, sharp and brutal. "It's never been an option, Elara. What's done is done. You can spend the rest of your life mourning who you were, or you can accept what you are now and learn to survive it. Those are your only choices." The words hit like a slap. Elara's hands clenched into fists. "You don't get to be angry with me. You don't get to act like I'm being unreasonable for wanting my life back." "I'm not angry with you." Koss's jaw tightened. "I'm angry that you're wasting time on impossible things when you could be—" He stopped, turning away. "Could be what?" Elara demanded. Koss was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled once more, flat, clinical. "Could be focusing on your future instead of your past. I don't have a future. You took it from me. I gave you a different one." He faced her again, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "One where you're stronger, faster, more capable than you've ever been. One where you don't have to be afraid anymore. One where I'm a monster like you." Elara finished. The words hung between them, brutal and true. Koss went very still. "Yes," he said quietly. "One where you're a monster like me." Elara's chest tightened. She'd meant it to hurt him, to crack that perfect control. But seeing the acceptance in his eyes, the way he didn't even try to deny it, made her feel like the cruel one. "Koss, you're right." He cut her off, his voice empty now, hollow. "I am a monster. I've killed people, tortured them, done things that would make you sick if you knew the details. I've spent 15 years becoming exactly what they turned me into, and I can't undo that any more than I can undo what I did to you." He moved toward the door, and Elara realized with a start that he was leaving, walking away mid-conversation, mid-training, mid-everything. It felt wrong. "Where are you going?" she asked. Koss paused at the threshold, his back to her. "I have work to attend to, business that's been neglected while I've been here." "With me, you mean?" "Yes." No inflection, no emotion. "With you." Elara took a step toward him, then stopped. "When will you be back?" "I don't know." He glanced over his shoulder, and the look in his eyes made her chest ache. "Take the day to rest. Explore the penthouse if you want. The security system won't let you leave, but you have full access to everything else." "Koss." "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry I did this to you. I'm sorry you ended up with me instead of someone who could have actually saved you properly. I'm sorry that being a monster is all I know how to be anymore." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Elara stood alone in the training room, her heart hammering and her thoughts in chaos. She should have been relieved, should have been glad for the space, the break from his constant presence. Instead, she felt something dangerously close to panic. Because somewhere in the last 2 weeks, without noticing, without meaning to, she'd started to need him. Not just for the training, or the pain management, or the survival skills, but for the understanding. For being the only person in the world who looked at her scars and saw a mirror instead of a victim. For making her feel less alone in a body that didn't feel like hers anymore. And that realization was more terrifying than anything else he'd done to her. Elara spent the next 3 hours tearing the penthouse apart. Not literally, though she was starting to suspect she could if she wanted to. Her strength was still developing, unpredictable. Yesterday she'd accidentally bent a fork. The day before she'd cracked a tile in the bathroom floor just by stepping too hard. No, this destruction was methodical, purposeful. She searched every room, every drawer, every cabinet, looking for, what, information, weapons, a way out? She didn't know. She just knew she couldn't sit still anymore. Couldn't keep pretending this was normal, that training with him every morning and eating meals in careful silence and feeling her body become something inhuman was fine. The office was locked. Of course it was. The one room she actually wanted to explore, and it had a biometric scanner on the door. She tried her hand anyway. Maybe the security system would recognize her now, but got nothing. Fine. Elara moved to the next room, which turned out to be a bedroom, not the medical suite where she'd first woken up, and not the sparse room she'd been sleeping in. This one was different. Personal. She knew immediately it was Kos's. The bed was massive, made with military precision. Dark sheets, no decorative pillows, nothing unnecessary. The walls were the same neutral color as the rest of the penthouse, but there were subtle differences here. A jacket hanging in the open closet, a book on the nightstand, something in Russian, the Cyrillic letters unfamiliar. A photograph in a simple black frame. Elara picked it up, her hands steadier now than they'd been 2 weeks ago. The modifications had fixed her essential tremor without her even noticing. The photo was old, faded at the edges. It showed a boy, maybe 14 or 15, with dark hair and familiar features. He was smiling, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. There was something haunted in his gaze, even then. Behind him stood a man in an expensive suit, his hand heavy on the boy's shoulder. Possessive, controlling. Elara didn't need context to understand what she was looking at. This was Kos before. Before the modifications, before he became whatever he was now. When he was just a kid who'd been taken by people who saw him as raw material. Her chest tightened. She set the photo down carefully and turned to leave, and that's when she saw it. The mirror on the far wall was actually a door, slightly ajar. Behind it, another room, smaller, darker. Elara's instinct screamed at her to leave, to respect his privacy, to not go snooping in places she wasn't invited. She went in anyway. The room was an office of sorts, but not the locked one she'd found earlier. This was more intimate, personal. The walls were covered in documentation, medical reports, photographs, newspaper clippings, all connected by red string and patterns that would have looked insane if they weren't so methodical. Elara moved closer, her enhanced vision picking out details in the low light. The photographs showed faces, dozens of them. Some were crossed out in red marker. Others had dates written beneath them. All of them looked professional. Lab coats, suits, the cold expressions of people used to wielding power. The people who'd created the modification program. The ones Kos had hunted down. Her eyes caught on one particular report, pinned at the center of the web. The heading made her blood run cold. Subject 47, Konstantin Wilder status, sole survivor recommendation terminate. Beneath it, in Kos's sharp handwriting, they tried. I survived. They didn't. Elara's hands trembled as she reached for the next document. This one was newer, the paper still crisp. A contract of some kind, written in German and English. Her translation. The document that had gotten her into this nightmare in the first place. And at the bottom, in Kos's handwriting again. Subject 48, Elara Voss status, integration successful prognosis, monitoring required. She stared at the words, her heart pounding. Subject 48. She wasn't just his mirror. She was the next number in a sequence, another subject in the program that had destroyed him. The door opened behind her. Elara spun, her new reflexes moving her faster than thought. But it was just Kos, standing in the doorway with an expression she couldn't read. You weren't supposed to find this, he said quietly. Clearly. Elara gestured at the walls, at the evidence of his obsession. How long have you been planning this? How long have you been looking for the next subject? I wasn't looking. Kos stepped into the room and she noticed for the first time how exhausted he looked. I was trying to prevent it. The people restarting the program, I've been hunting them for 3 years, trying to destroy their research before they could use it. But you used it first. Yes, no denial. Because I realized something. The only way to truly understand how to stop this program was to see if the modifications could be improved. Made survivable, I needed. He stopped, his jaw clenching. You needed a test subject, Elara finished, her voice hollow. Someone expendable. You were going to die anyway. Kos's control finally shattered completely. They were going to take you, torture you for information, and kill you when they were done. I saw the order, Elara. I saw your name on the termination list. So yes, I took you. I modified you. I turned you into this. He gestured at her, at the scars on her arms. But at least you're alive. This isn't living. It's more than you would have had." He moved closer, and she saw the desperation in his eyes now. Raw and terrible. "I gave you a chance. I gave you power. I gave you—" "A prison," Elara interrupted. "You gave me a beautiful prison and called it protection. You turned me into a monster and called it an upgrade. You violated every choice I had left and told yourself it was mercy." Kos flinched like she'd struck him. "You're right," he said finally, his voice breaking. "You're absolutely right. I'm not your savior. I'm not even your captor anymore. I'm worse than that. I'm the person who made you into something you hate. And I did it, knowing exactly how much it would destroy you. Because I needed to know." He turned away, his hands clenching into fists. "I needed to know if it was possible," he finished quietly, "to go through this and come out human on the other side, to survive it and not become—" "A monster like you," Elara whispered. Kos's shoulders sagged. "Yes." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elara did something that surprised them both. She crossed the space between them and placed her hand on his shoulder. Kos went rigid under her touch, his breath catching. "I don't forgive you," Elara said quietly. "I don't know if I ever will. What you did to me, it's unforgivable." She felt him tense, waiting for the blow. "But I understand why you did it. The admission cost her, but it was true. And I know, God help me, I know that you're the only person in the world who can help me survive this." Kos turned slowly, and the look in his eyes was something she'd never seen before. Vulnerable, almost broken. "I don't deserve that," he said. "No," Elara agreed. "You don't." She didn't pull her hand away. They stood there in the dim light of his obsession room, two monsters learning how to be human again. Or maybe for the first time. And when Kos's hand came up to cover hers, she let it stay. Chapter 5. The Past Unburied. They didn't talk about what happened in the obsession room. The next morning, Elara found coffee waiting as usual. Kos was in the training room as usual. They fell into their routine as if the previous day had never happened, as if she hadn't seen the evidence of his 15-year vendetta, as if she hadn't touched him with something other than anger. But something had shifted between them. The air felt different now, charged, like the space between lightning and thunder. Kos was more careful with her during training, not gentler. He pushed her just as hard, but there was a new awareness in the way he moved around her, in the way his hands lingered, just slightly longer when correcting her form, in the way his eyes tracked her across the room, even when he was pretending to focus on the equipment. Elara felt it too, that heightened awareness, the way her breath caught when he stood too close, the way her body responded to his proximity with something that definitely wasn't fear anymore. It was dangerous. Everything about this was dangerous. 3 days after she'd found his documentation, Kos changed their routine. "We're going out," he announced over morning coffee. Elara nearly dropped her mug. "What?" "You've been cleared for limited external exposure." He was already moving toward the hallway. "Get dressed. Something that covers your arms completely. And shoes you can run in if necessary." "Wait," Elara set her coffee down and followed him. "What do you mean, cleared? By who?" "By me." Kos disappeared into what she now knew was his bedroom. "You've mastered the basics. Your episodes are manageable. Your control is adequate. It's time to see how you function outside controlled conditions." Adequate. The word should have stung. Instead, Elara felt something like pride. She pushed the feeling down and focused on the panic rising to replace it. "I can't just go outside. People will... What am I supposed to tell people? How do I explain?" Kos emerged holding a leather jacket. Black, expensive looking, definitely too big for her. "You don't explain anything. You're a woman going about your day. No one will question it unless you give them reason to." "The scars will be covered." He held out the jacket. "Long sleeves, high collar, standard precautions." Elara took it automatically, the leather soft under her fingers. It smelled like him, that clean, sharp scent she'd grown too familiar with. "Where are we going?" she asked. Something flickered in Kos's expression. "Somewhere I should have taken you weeks ago." That wasn't ominous at all. 20 minutes later, Elara stood in the private elevator that serviced the penthouse, watching the floor numbers descend with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She was leaving, actually leaving the prison she'd been trapped in for, she'd lost count, 3 weeks? A month? The jacket fit her exactly as Kos had predicted, too big, swallowing her frame, but covering every inch of exposed skin. She'd paired it with dark jeans and boots she'd found in the closet of the room she'd been using. Everything fit perfectly, like he'd known her sizes. Of course he had. He'd performed surgery on her. He knew her body better than she did now. Kos stood beside her in the elevator, dressed in his usual dark suit. He looked every inch the dangerous businessman, controlled, professional, utterly untouchable. But Elara had learned to read the subtle tells. The tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped once against his thigh before going still. He was nervous. The realization was startling. She'd never seen him nervous before. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked, as the elevator descended past the 20th floor. "Nothing that matters right now." Kos. He glanced at her, and for a moment his mask slipped. She saw exhaustion there, and something else, something that looked almost like regret. "Where I'm taking you," he said carefully, "is going to be difficult, but you need to see it." "See what?" The elevator reached the ground floor before he could answer. The doors opened onto an underground parking garage, pristine, well-lit, mostly empty at this hour. A black SUV with tinted windows waited near the elevator, engine already running. Kos placed his hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward the vehicle. The touch was brief, professional, but Elara felt it burn through the leather jacket like a brand. "Stay close to me," he said quietly. "Don't talk to anyone. If something feels wrong, you tell me immediately. Understood? You're scaring me." "Good." He opened the passenger door for her. "Fear keeps you alert. Use it." Elara climbed in, her enhanced senses immediately cataloging everything. The driver was built like a wall. Thick neck, scarred knuckles, the kind of face that had seen violence and dealt it in equal measure. He didn't acknowledge her, just waited for Kos to get in before pulling out of the garage. They drove in silence through the city. Elara watched familiar streets slide past the tinted windows, her chest tight. She'd lived here for 5 years, walked these sidewalks, caught buses on these corners, grabbed coffee at that cafe on the corner of her apartment building. The SUV slowed as they passed it, and Elara's breath caught. 3 weeks. It had only been 3 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime. She could see her window from here. Dark, empty, probably gathering dust and unpaid bills. "Keep looking forward," Kos said quietly. "That's my home." "That was your home." His voice was gentle but firm. "It's not safe for you there anymore. It hasn't been since the night I took you." Elara's hands clenched in her lap. "You could at least let me get my things. My laptop, my books, my—" "Already done." Kos nodded to the driver, who reached back and handed Elara a tablet. "I had everything retrieved and cataloged. Digital files have been backed up. Physical items are in storage. If there's something specific you need, I can have it brought to the penthouse." Elara stared at the tablet, at the inventory of her entire life reduced to lines on a screen. "You went through my things. I had people go through your things. A distinction without a difference. I needed to make sure there was nothing that could be traced back to you, nothing that could put you at risk." "You mean nothing that could lead people to you?" Kos's jaw tightened. "That too." The SUV turned onto a highway, heading out of the city. Elara watched the buildings thin out, replaced by suburbs, then stretches of forest. They drove for 40 minutes in tense silence before finally turning onto a private road. A high fence appeared, topped with security cameras. The driver entered a code, and the gate swung open. Elara's stomach nodded. "Kos, where are we?" "Somewhere. No one will look for you." He met her eyes. "Somewhere you need to see to understand what you're part of now." The road wound through dense trees before opening onto a clearing, and there, like something out of a nightmare, stood a compound. Not a house, not a facility. A compound. Multiple buildings, all modern and sterile-looking, connected by covered walkways, security cameras on every corner, armed guards patrolling the perimeter. And in the center, a larger building with floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the morning sun like blank eyes. Elara's breath came short and fast. What is this place? The original research facility. Koss's voice was flat, empty, where they created the modification program. Where they... He stopped, his hands clenching. Where they made me. The SUV pulled up to the main building, and Elara realized with growing horror that this wasn't a ruin, it was active. People moved behind those windows. Equipment hummed. This place was operational. You said you destroyed them, she whispered. You said you killed everyone involved in the program. I did. Koss opened his door, stepping out. Everyone who participated in the original experiments. Everyone who tortured children for profit. But the facility itself... He paused, looking up at the building with an expression she couldn't read. I couldn't destroy it. Not until I understood it completely. Elara's hands trembled as she climbed out of the SUV. The air here felt wrong. Too clean, too still, like a wound that had scabbed over but never actually healed. So you kept it, she said. You kept the place where they tortured you. I needed it. Koss moved toward the entrance, and Elara followed because what else could she do? The research, the equipment, the data. It's all still here. Every experiment they ran, every failure, every success, including... He stopped at the entrance, his hand on the biometric scanner. Including me, he finished quietly. The door clicked open. Inside was exactly what Elara expected, and somehow worse. White walls, fluorescent lighting, the antiseptic smell of medical facilities trying to cover something darker underneath. And the memories. She could almost feel them, soaked into the walls, the floor, the air itself. Pain and fear and violation crystallized into architecture. Koss led her down a corridor, past rooms with examination tables and monitoring equipment, past what looked like holding cells, past a room full of filing cabinets that probably contained horrors she didn't want to imagine. They stopped in front of a door marked simply, Subject Containment, Wing 7. This is where they kept me, Koss said, his voice devoid of emotion. For 3 years, from age 15 to 18, this was my home. He opened the door. The room beyond was small, Spartan, a bed bolted to the floor, a toilet in the corner, restraints on the walls, and covering every available surface, equations, notes. Desperate, cramped handwriting that Elara recognized even though she'd never seen it before. It was Koss's handwriting, younger, messier, but unmistakably his. I wrote on the walls because they wouldn't give me paper, he explained, moving into the room like a ghost visiting its own grave. Mathematical proofs, chemical formulas, anything I could remember from school, anything to prove I was still human, still capable of thought. Elara's chest constricted. She moved closer, reading the desperate scrawls. Day 247. Spinal modification complete. Pain levels 8/10. Still breathing. Day 302. They're pleased with my progress. I want to die. Day 415. I will survive this. I will survive this. I will survive this. Written over and over and over, like a mantra, like prayer. Koss, she breathed. They took me from an orphanage, he continued, his eyes distant. Told me I'd been selected for a special program. That I'd be given opportunities, education, a future. His laugh was hollow. They weren't lying. Just not about the kind of future I'd imagined. He moved to the bed, sitting on its edge, like he'd done 1,000 times before. The restraints hung loose beside him, and Elara noticed his hands had gone to them automatically. Muscle memory. 3 years, he said. 3 years in this room. 3 years of modifications, experiments, testing. They'd wake me up in the middle of the night to run trials, see how my enhanced reflexes functioned under stress, see how much pain I could endure before breaking. How did you survive it? Elara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Koss looked up at her, and the expression in his eyes made her want to weep. "I didn't," he said simply. "The boy who came into this room died here. What walked out was something else." He stood, moving to one of the walls where the writing was densest. His fingers traced the words there: cramped, desperate, young. Subject 47 understands. Survival requires sacrifice. Humanity is the first casualty. "I wrote that," Koss said, 2 days before they declared me successful, before they let me out of this room and started training me to use what they'd made me into. He turned to face her, "And I've spent every day since trying to prove it wrong." Elara's throat tightened. "Have you?" "No. Honest. Brutal. I became exactly what they wanted. A weapon. A monster. Someone who could kill without hesitation, survive anything, feel nothing." His eyes met hers. "Until you." The words hung between them. "Why are you showing me this?" Elara asked. Koss moved toward her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "Because you need to understand what we are, what this program does to people. You think I'm a monster, and you're right, but I'm a monster by design, created with purpose. And now—" He reached out, his fingers ghosting over the scars on her wrist through the leather jacket. "Now you are too," he finished quietly. "And I need you to see where it comes from, what it means, what we're fighting against by existing." Elara stared at him, this broken, dangerous man who'd violated her in every way that mattered, and was now showing her his deepest scars. Literally and figuratively. "I hate you," she whispered. "I know. I hate what you did to me. I know. But I understand it now." The admission cost her. "Why you did it. Why you needed to see if someone could survive this better than you did." Koss's expression cracked, just slightly. "And did you?" Elara thought about the last 3 weeks. The pain, the fear, the slow, terrible process of becoming something other than human, of learning to live inside a body that didn't feel like hers anymore, of finding unexpected comfort in the only other person who understood. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Ask me again when this is over." "It's never over, Elara." Koss's voice was gentle, too gentle. "This is who we are now. Forever." He was right. She knew he was right. But standing in this room, where a boy had died and a monster had been born, Elara made a choice. "Then we survive it together," she said. "Not because I forgive you, not because this is okay, but because we're the only 2 people in the world who understand what this costs." Koss stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Together," he echoed. And when his hand found hers, scarred palm against scarred palm, Elara didn't pull away. They stood there in the room where everything had begun, 2 monsters learning that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to be alone in their monstrosity. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. But it was something. And for now, that would have to be enough. Chapter 6. The Shift. The drive back to the city was silent. Not the tense, brittle silence of before. Something quieter, heavier. Like they'd both excavated something from that facility and couldn't quite figure out what to do with it now. Elara stared out the tinted window, watching the forest give way to suburbs to city. Her hands still tingled where Koss had held it. She'd pulled away eventually, back in that terrible room where a boy had lost his humanity, but the ghost of his touch remained. She hated that she noticed. Hated more, that part of her had wanted to hold on. Koss sat beside her in the back seat, his usual control firmly back in place. But Elara had learned to read the small tells. The way his jaw was just slightly too tight. The way his fingers tapped once against his thigh before going still. He was unsettled. Good, she was too. "There's somewhere else we need to go," Koss said as they reached the city limits. Elara's stomach nodded. "Where?" "You'll see." He leaned forward, giving the driver an address she didn't recognize. Then he settled back, his eyes finding hers in the reflection of the window. "You need to understand the full scope of what you're part of now. The facility was the past. This is the present." "And what's the present?" "Messy." A ghost of something that might have been humor crossed his face. "But necessary." The SUV wound through downtown, into a district Elara knew by reputation but had never visited. Old warehouse buildings converted into expensive lofts. Art galleries. The kind of restaurants that didn't have prices on the menu. Money, power, danger wearing expensive suits. They stopped in front of a building that looked like all the others, industrial bones dressed up in modern glass. The driver got out first, scanning the street with professional paranoia. Then he opened Koss's door. "Stay close," Koss said, extending his hand to help her out. Elara took it because the alternative was struggling out of the SUV on her own, and she'd already humiliated herself enough for one day. His grip was firm, steadying, and he didn't let go until she was standing beside him. The building's entrance was unmarked, except for a small brass plaque, Wilder Industries. Elara's breath caught. "This is yours?" "One of several." Koss placed his hand on the biometric scanner, and the heavy glass doors clicked open. "Pharmaceutical research. Officially, we develop treatments for neurological disorders, genetic conditions, chronic pain management." "And unofficially?" His mouth quirked. "We find ways to make sure what was done to us never happens to anyone else." The lobby was everything Elara expected. Polished marble, abstract art, the kind of minimalist design that screamed money. But it was empty. No receptionist. No security guard. Just cameras tracking their movement with silent efficiency. "Everyone's gone for the day," Koss explained, leading her to a private elevator. "I cleared the building. What I'm about to show you isn't for civilian eyes." The elevator required another biometric scan. Then they were ascending, past the ground floor offices, past what looked like research labs, past floors Elara couldn't identify through the frosted glass. They stopped at the top floor. The doors opened onto something that looked less like an office and more like a war room. Multiple screens lined one wall, displaying data feeds, security camera footage, news broadcasts from around the world. The center of the room was dominated by a large table with holographic displays, 3D renderings of chemical compounds, neural pathways, things Elara didn't have the background to identify. And everywhere, were files, physical documents, digital displays, photographs connected by red string just like in his obsession room at the penthouse. But these weren't tracking the people who'd created the program. These were tracking new subjects. Elara moved closer, her enhanced vision picking out details, photographs of people, men, women, teenagers, all with dates and locations, all with status updates in Koss's sharp handwriting. Located, extracted, safe. Terminated before modification. Family compensated. Lost. Presumed dead. "What is this?" she whispered. Koss moved to the main display, pulling up a map that showed locations across 3 continents. Red dots. Dozens of them. "After I escaped the program, I spent years hunting the people responsible. But I also started tracking something else." He tapped the screen, and the red dots began to pulse. New candidates, people the remnants of the organization had identified as potential subjects. Elara's hands went cold. "There are more of them? More people trying to restart the program?" "Not anymore. Not the original group," Koss's expression darkened. "But the research leaked, got sold to the highest bidders. Black market genetic modification programs are operating in 7 countries that I know of. Probably more I haven't found yet." He pulled up another screen, this one showing laboratory equipment, medical files, security footage from facilities that looked disturbingly similar to the one they'd just left. "I've been shutting them down," he continued, "one by one, extracting the subjects before they can be modified, destroying the research, eliminating the people funding it." "Eliminating?" Elara repeated. "You mean killing?" "Yes, no apology. I mean killing." She stared at the map, at all those red dots. at the lives he'd saved or ended or somehow balanced in his brutal moral calculus. How many? Subjects extracted and relocated? 43. Koss's voice was clinical, but Elara heard the weight underneath. Facilities destroyed? 12. People terminated. He paused. I stopped counting at 100. The number should have horrified her, should have sent her running. Instead, Elara found herself asking, where are they now? The ones you saved? Koss tapped the screen again, and new markers appeared, green dots scattered across the globe. Safe houses, new identities, as far from this world as I could get them. His jaw tightened. Most of them were just candidates, people who fit the genetic profile but hadn't been modified yet. I got them out before. He stopped. Before someone like you got to them, Elara finished. Yes. She moved closer to the display, studying the green dots. 43 lives pulled from the edge of the nightmare she was living. 43 people who would never know what it felt like to wake up in a body that didn't belong to them. Why didn't you save me? The question came out quieter than she intended. If you were extracting candidates, why did you modify me instead? Koss was silent for a long moment. Because by the time I found you, he said finally, it was too late. They'd already issued the termination order. Already sent the team to grab you. I had maybe 12 hours to decide. He turned to face her. I could extract you, give you a new identity, send you somewhere safe, and hope they didn't track you down eventually. Or turn me into something that could fight back, Elara whispered. Yes. His eyes held hers. I made a choice, maybe the wrong one. Maybe I should have just gotten you out, but I looked at your file, and I saw. He stopped, something crossing his face that looked almost like pain. You saw yourself, Elara said. Koss nodded slowly. Brilliant, isolated. Someone who'd spent their whole life trying to be invisible, because visibility meant danger. Someone who, if given the right tools, could be powerful instead of prey. You don't get to make that choice for me. I know, no argument, but I did anyway. Elara turned back to the map, to all those green dots representing lives saved by the man who destroyed hers. The irony wasn't lost on her. Show me the rest, she said. Koss pulled up more files, and for the next hour he walked her through his private war, the network he'd built, the resources he'd accumulated, the careful, methodical way he'd been dismantling the genetic modification underground piece by piece. It was impressive, terrifying. The work of someone who'd turned obsession into purpose, and purpose into something almost noble. Almost. There's one more thing you need to see, Koss said, pulling up a new file. This one had Elara's name on it. Her breath caught. The file contained everything. Her translation work, her apartment lease, her medical records, bank statements, even photographs, her walking to the corner coffee shop, sitting in the library, completely unaware she was being watched. When did you start tracking me? She asked, her voice tight. 6 months ago. Koss's tone was careful, clinical. When your name appeared on a candidate list for a facility in Eastern Europe, they were building a genetic profile, looking for specific markers. You matched. Elara's hands clenched. So you've been watching me for 6 months, studying me, planning this. No, the sharpness in his voice made her look up. I was planning to extract you, get you out before they could move. But then you accepted that translation job, and everything accelerated. They knew you'd seen the documents. They moved up their timeline. His jaw tightened. I had to make a choice faster than I wanted to. And you chose wrong. Maybe, he closed the file. Or, maybe I chose the only option that gave you any chance at all. I don't know anymore, Elara. I stopped knowing the difference between right and wrong somewhere around body count 50. The confession hung between them. Elara looked at this man, this monster, this savior, this broken thing that had turned his trauma into a crusade, and felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness. She wasn't there yet, might never be. But understanding, real understanding. He'd shown her the facility where he'd died. Shown her the war he was fighting. Shown her the 43 lives he'd saved, and the hundreds he'd ended, and the impossible moral math he did every day just to survive. He'd shown her everything, and now she had to decide what to do with it. "I want to help," she heard herself say. Kos went very still. "What?" "With this." Elara gestured at the displays, the map, the evidence of his private war. "You said there are more facilities, more people trying to restart the program. I want to help shut them down." "No." The flatness of his refusal caught her off guard. "Why not? You modified me for this, didn't you? To see if I could be powerful instead of prey? Well, here I am. Use me." "It's not." Kos turned away, his hands clenching. "You don't understand what you're asking." "Then explain it to me." He spun back, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "The extraction work is one thing. Getting people out, giving them new lives, that's clean, relatively. But the rest of it?" His voice dropped. "It's ugly, Elara. It's torture and murder and things I will never tell you about because I don't want you to know what I'm capable of." "I already know what you're capable of." She held up her scarred wrist. "You did this to me, remember? That's different." "How?" "Because I did it to save you." The words burst out of him, raw and desperate. "Everything I've done to you has been about keeping you alive. But the work I do out there," he gestured at the screens, "that's about making sure other people don't survive. And I won't let you become that. I won't let you turn into what I am." Elara stared at him, this man who'd violated her in every way that mattered and was now trying to protect her from himself. "What if I want to become that?" she asked quietly. Kos flinched like she'd struck him. "What if being powerful means being dangerous?" she continued. "What if the only way to make sure this never happens to anyone else is to be willing to do terrible things? You've been doing it alone for 15 years, Kos. Why?" "Because I'm already damned." His voice was hollow. "Because there's no saving what I've become. But you still have a chance. You can still be the person you were, just enhanced. You don't have to lose your humanity the way I lost mine." Elara moved closer, close enough to see the desperation in his eyes, the fear. He was afraid of her becoming like him. "I'm already not the person I was," she said. "That person died the moment you put me on that table. What I am now, I'm still figuring that out. But I know I don't want to be helpless. I don't want to hide in your penthouse learning to manage pain while you're out here trying to save the world one body at a time." "Elara." "Let me help," she interrupted. "Not because I forgive you, not because this is okay, but because maybe," she reached out, her hand finding his, "maybe we can be less monstrous together than you are alone." Kos looked down at their joined hands, and something in his expression broke. "You have no idea what you're asking," he whispered. "Then show me." She squeezed his hand. "Like you showed me the facility, like you showed me this. Show me what you do, and let me decide if I can live with it." For a long moment he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, slowly, he nodded. "One job," he said. "One extraction. If you can handle it, if you can do what's necessary without breaking, then we'll talk about the rest." Elara's heart raced. "When?" Kos pulled up a file on the display. A photograph appeared. A girl, maybe 16, with frightened eyes and bruises on her arms. "Her name is Mara," he said. "She's being held in a facility in Chicago, candidate for modification. They're planning to start the process in 72 hours. His eyes met Elara's. "We're going to get her out before that happens." "How?" Kos's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Dark, dangerous. "However, we have to." Chapter 7. Crossing the Line. The plane was small, private, and completely unmarked. Elara sat in one of the leather seats, watching the city disappear beneath them as they climbed. 48 hours. That's all the time they'd had to prepare for this. Her first extraction. Her first real test of what she'd become. Kos sat across from her, laptop open, reviewing files with the same clinical focus he brought to everything. but Elara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set just slightly too tight. He was nervous. Not about the mission. She'd watched him plan it with ruthless precision, every contingency mapped out, every variable accounted for. No, he was nervous about her. About what she might see, what she might do, what she might become. "Go through it again," he said without looking up. Elara suppressed a sigh. They'd been over this a dozen times already. The facility is disguised as a private medical center. 3 floors. Mara is being held on the 2nd floor, East Wing, room 214. Security is heavy but predictable. Guards change shift at 11 p.m. We go in at 11:03, extract the target, and we're out before they realize what happened. And if something goes wrong, we adapt. She met his eyes when he finally looked up. "You've trained me for this, Kos. I'm ready." "You think you're ready?" He closed the laptop. "But you've never done this before. Never walked into a hostile environment knowing people might die. Never had to make the choice between someone else's life and your mission objective. Have you?" "More times than I can count." His voice was flat, empty. "And every time I chose the mission. Every time I became a little less human. That's what I'm trying to protect you from." Elara leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "What if I don't want to be protected? What if I want to make my own choices, even if they're the wrong ones?" Kos was silent for a long moment. Then, "This is your last chance to back out. Once we land, once we're in motion, there's no going back. You'll see things you can't unsee. Do things you can't undo." "Like you did to me?" The words were cruel, and she knew it, but they were also true. Kos flinched. "Yes, like I did to you." Elara sat back, studying him, this powerful, dangerous man who'd destroyed her life and was now desperately trying to keep her from destroying her soul. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. "I'm not backing out," she said firmly, "so stop asking." Something flickered in his eyes. Relief, maybe, mixed with resignation. He nodded once, then returned to his laptop. They flew the rest of the way in silence. Chicago at night was beautiful from the air, a sprawl of lights against the dark water of the lake, but Elara barely noticed. Her enhanced senses were already kicking into overdrive, her body preparing for what was coming, even though her conscious mind was still catching up. The modifications worked like that now, anticipating danger, adapting before she consciously registered the threat. It should have felt like power. It felt like becoming something other than herself. The SUV that picked them up from the private airfield was identical to the one in the city. Black, unmarked driver who looked like he could kill someone with his thumb. Kos had a team. Elara was learning. People who asked no questions and followed orders without hesitation. She wondered how many of them were like her, modified, changed, trying to survive what had been done to them. She wondered how many of them still considered themselves human. The facility was in an industrial district, surrounded by other anonymous buildings. Perfect camouflage. No one would notice medical transports coming and going. No one would question the security. No one would hear the screaming. Elara's hands clenched as they drove past, circling the block. Through the tinted windows, she could see the building. 4 stories of brick and steel, cameras on every corner, guards at the entrance trying to look like security for a legitimate business. "Mara's on the 2nd floor, Kos reminded her, pulling up a schematic on his tablet. "East Wing, room 214. She'll be sedated. They keep candidates unconscious to prevent escape attempts. We'll need to carry her out." "And the guards?" "Leave them to me." His voice was cold, clinical. "Your only job is to get to Mara and get her out. Everything else is secondary." Elara looked at him. "Everything?" "Everything." His eyes met hers. "Including me. If something goes wrong, if I'm compromised, you take the girl and you run. Understood?" "No." Kos's expression hardened. "Elara?" "I said no." She held his gaze. "We're doing this together. That was the deal. I don't leave you behind any more than you'd leave me. For a moment, she thought he might argue. Then something in his face softened, just slightly, just enough for her to see the man underneath the monster. Together, he agreed quietly. The SUV stopped 2 blocks from the facility. They had 15 minutes until the shift change. Elara stepped out into the Chicago night, and her enhanced senses immediately went into overdrive. She could hear conversations from blocks away, smell the pollution in the air, feel the vibration of the city through her feet. Everything was too much, too sharp, too immediate. She took a breath, focusing the way Kos had taught her, channeling the sensory overload instead of drowning in it. Better. Kos appeared beside her, and she noticed for the first time that he was armed. Multiple weapons, concealed but accessible. She'd seen the arsenal back at the penthouse, enough firepower to start a small war. Apparently, he'd brought some of it with him. "You're sure about this?" he asked one last time. Elara rolled her shoulders, feeling her modified muscles respond with perfect precision. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." Kos's mouth quirked, almost a smile. "Good answer." They moved through the darkness like ghosts, silent, efficient, using the shadows and blind spots Kos had identified during reconnaissance. Ilara's enhanced reflexes made it easy. Her body knew how to move without conscious thought, finding the quiet places, the safe paths. She was built for this now, whether she wanted to be or not. The facility's perimeter fence was 12 feet of chain link, topped with razor wire. Kos produced a small device from his jacket, attached it to the fence, and 30 seconds later, a section of the metal had corroded enough to peel back. They were inside. The real building sat 50 yards from the fence, brick and steel and broken dreams. Elara could feel it now, that same wrongness she'd sensed at Kos's facility. Places where terrible things happened left a mark, an imprint on the world that people like her could feel. "Second floor, east wing," Kos murmured, leading her to a service entrance. "Stay close, stay quiet, and remember." The door opened before he could finish. A guard stood there, surprise flickering across his face for just a moment before Kos moved. It was fast. Faster than Elara could track, even with her enhanced vision. One moment the guard was reaching for his radio, the next he was on the ground, unconscious. Or dead, she couldn't tell. Didn't want to know. "Come on," Kos said, already moving into the building. Elara stepped over the guard and followed. The inside was exactly what she'd feared. Sterile hallways, fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic trying to cover something worse. Rooms with locked doors, the distant sound of machinery, and underneath it all, so faint she almost missed it. Crying. Someone was crying. Elara's hands clenched. "Kos!" "Focus." His voice was sharp. "We get Mara. That's the mission. We can't save everyone tonight." The words cut, but he was right. She knew he was right. That didn't make it easier to hear the crying and keep walking. They reached the second floor via a service stairwell, emerging into another corridor identical to the one below. Room 214 was at the end of the hall, past 3 other doors and 2 security cameras that Kos disabled with practiced efficiency. He reached the door first, working the electronic lock with a device Elara didn't recognize. 10 seconds. 20. The lock clicked. Kos pushed the door open, and Elara's breath caught. The room was small, clinical, exactly like the one she'd woken up in what felt like a lifetime ago. And on the bed, a girl, 16 at most. Dark hair spread across the pillow, IV lines running into her arms, restraints on her wrists and ankles, currently unlocked but ready. She looked so young, so vulnerable. Elara moved to the bedside, her hands trembling as she checked the IV sedatives. Just like Kos had said, strong enough to keep someone unconscious but not strong enough to cause permanent damage. Not yet, anyway. "Can you carry her?" Kos asked, positioning himself by the door. Elara tested her strength, lifting the girl carefully. Her modified muscles handled the weight easily, like carrying a child. Yes. Good. We go back the way we came, fast and quiet, if we encounter resistance. The alarm went off. Loud, piercing, absolutely impossible to miss. Ko swore, a string of words in Russian that Elara didn't need translation to understand. They know we're here. Change of plans. We go out the west exit, down the fire escape. Move! Elara cradled Mara against her chest and ran. The modifications made it easy. Her body knew how to move, how to balance, how to protect the girl while still maintaining speed. She followed Kos through corridors that blurred together, his movements sure and confident even as shouts echoed behind them. They burst through a fire door onto a metal staircase, and that's when the shooting started. Bullets sparked off the railing, and Elara's body reacted before her brain caught up, ducking, twisting, using her own body to shield Mara from the gunfire. The girl was still unconscious, blessedly unaware of the chaos. Kos returned fire with brutal efficiency. 3 shots, 3 guards down. He didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. This was what he did. This was what he was. And if Elara stayed with him, if she chose this path, this was what she would become. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, racing down the fire escape with bullets flying and an unconscious girl in her arms, Elara felt something else entirely. Alive. For the first time since waking up modified, she felt alive. They hit the ground running, Kos leading them through an alley toward where the SUV was supposed to be waiting. More guards appeared, and Kos dealt with them with that same cold precision. Elara didn't watch, didn't want to see, just held Mara close and ran. The SUV was there, engine running, back door open. They dove inside, and the vehicle was moving before the door even closed. Bullets shattered the rear window, safety glass raining down, but they were clear. They'd made it. Elara looked down at Mara, still unconscious in her arms, and felt something crack open in her chest. Relief, pride, horror. She'd done it. She'd extracted someone from the same nightmare she'd lived. She'd saved a life. And people had died to make it possible. Kos was on his phone, speaking rapid-fire Russian to someone on the other end, coordinating cleanup probably, making sure the bodies were dealt with, the evidence erased. The monster doing his work. When he hung up, he turned to Elara, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Relief. Real, raw relief. You did well, he said quietly. People died. Yes, no apology, no justification. They were going to modify her, Elara, turn her into what we are. Or worse, kill her when the procedure failed. Those people, the guards, the technicians, they knew what they were part of. They made their choices. And we made ours. Kos held her gaze. Yes, we made ours. Elara looked down at Mara again, this girl who would never know what had almost happened to her. Who would wake up somewhere safe, with a new identity and a chance at a normal life. Because Elara had been willing to do what was necessary. Because she'd chosen to become the monster that protected instead of preyed. Where do we take her? She asked. Safe house in Wisconsin. She'll wake up tomorrow with no memory of this. We'll give her a new name, new documents, enough money to start over. Kos's voice was gentle. And then we'll disappear from her life. Let her be normal. The way we can't be. The way we can't be, he agreed. The SUV drove on through the Chicago night, carrying 2 monsters and the girl they'd saved. And Elara sat there, cradling an unconscious teenager, feeling the last pieces of who she'd been fall away. She wasn't the person who'd woken up in that penthouse anymore. She wasn't even sure she was the person who'd walked into this facility an hour ago. She was something new, something dangerous. Something that stood between the predators and their prey. And God help her, she didn't entirely hate what she was becoming. Kos's hand found hers in the darkness, scarred palm against scarred palm. Welcome to the war, he said quietly. Elara squeezed his hand. She didn't let go for the rest of the drive. Chapter 8. The reckoning. They delivered Mara to the safe house at 3 in the morning. Elara watched through the SUV's window as Kos carried the still unconscious girl inside, her small frame almost disappearing in his arms. The house was unremarkable, suburban, quiet, the kind of place where no one asked questions because everyone had secrets to keep. A woman met them at the door. Mid-40s, hard eyes, the kind of face that had seen too much and survived anyway. She took Mara without a word, just a brief nod to Kos that spoke volumes. This wasn't her first extraction. Wouldn't be her last. Kos returned to the SUV 5 minutes later, and they drove away in silence. Elara kept looking back, watching the house disappear into the darkness, wondering if Mara would wake up grateful or traumatized. If she'd spend the rest of her life wondering what had happened to her, or if the sedatives would erase even that much. "She'll be fine," Kos said, reading her thoughts the way he was starting to do too often. "Anna knows how to handle this. By tomorrow night, Mara will have a new identity, a bank account, and a cover story that won't fall apart under scrutiny. And then what? She just lives, goes to school, gets a job, pretends none of this happened?" "That's the idea," Kos stared out the window. "Normal life. The thing we gave up." The thing he'd stolen from her, Elara didn't say, but the thought hung between them anyway. They flew back as dawn broke over Chicago, the city turning gold and pink beneath them. Beautiful, like blood and honey mixing together. Elara watched it until her enhanced vision made her eyes burn, then closed them and tried not to think about the bodies they'd left behind. 3 guards. Maybe more. She'd stopped counting when the shooting started. Kos had killed them with the same clinical precision he brought to everything else. Efficient, brutal, necessary. And Elara had run past the bodies without looking, had prioritized the mission over the corpses, had made the choice he'd warned her about. The mission. Always the mission. She was becoming exactly what he'd feared. The thought should have horrified her. It didn't. Back at the penthouse, Kos disappeared into his office. Elara heard him on the phone. More Russian, terse, and controlled. Coordinating cleanup, she assumed. Making sure what happened in Chicago stayed in Chicago. She stood in the living room, still wearing the tactical gear he'd given her, and stared at her hands. These hands that had carried Mara to safety. These hands that belonged to a body that could move faster, hit harder, survive more than any human body should. These hands with scars that marked her as something other. She was exhausted, but the modifications meant she didn't need sleep the way she used to. Her body was already recovering from the exertion, healing micro tears in her muscles, processing the adrenaline still flooding her system. Efficient, optimized, inhuman. "You should rest," Kos said from behind her. Elara didn't turn. "I'm not tired." "Your body isn't. Your mind is." He moved closer, and she felt his presence like heat at her back. "What we did tonight, it takes a toll, even when it's necessary." "Is that what you tell yourself? That it's necessary?" "It's what I know." His voice was quiet, certain. "Those guards chose to work at a facility that tortures children. They knew what they were protecting. They weren't innocent." Elara finally turned to face him. "And that makes it okay? Killing them?" "No." Kos held her gaze. "It makes it survivable. There's a difference." The honesty of it hit her harder than a lie would have. He wasn't trying to justify what they'd done. Wasn't trying to make it noble or right. He was just acknowledging the cost. Living with it because the alternative was worse. "How many?" Elara asked. "How many what? How many people have you killed in 15 years of doing this?" Kos was silent for a long moment. "Then, I stopped counting at 300. The number should have shocked her, should have made her see him as the monster he claimed to be. Instead, she just felt tired. "And you're still human?" she asked. "After 300? His expression flickered, something that might have been pain or humor or both. "I'm still trying to figure that out." Elara moved past him, heading toward the kitchen. She needed water. Coffee, something to ground her in the physical world because her mind was starting to spiral. Kos followed, Because of course he did. He'd been following her, tracking her, monitoring her, studying her, for months before he'd taken her. Old habits probably. She filled a glass at the tap, drank it in 3 swallows, filled it again. Her metabolism was still running hot, burning through resources faster than seemed possible. The modifications adapt, Koss said, watching her. Your body is processing what happened tonight. The stress, the combat, the neural load. It'll settle in a few hours. Everything with you is clinical. Elara set the glass down too hard, and it cracked. Not shattered, just a hairline fracture spreading through the glass like a spiderweb. We just killed people, Koss. We broke into a facility, shot our way out, and left bodies behind. And you're talking about neural load and metabolic processing like it's a science experiment. It is a science experiment. His voice hardened. We are a science experiment. That's what we were made to be. The only difference is whether we let that destroy us or whether we use it to destroy the people who made us this way. And Mara? Was she part of the experiment? She was going to be. Koss moved closer, and Elara saw something fierce in his eyes. They had her scheduled for initial modification in 48 hours. Baseline neural mapping, genetic compatibility testing, preliminary integration of the first modifications. She would have been Subject 73, Elara, 73. He pulled out his phone, brought up a file, and showed it to her. Elara's breath caught. The document was clinical, brutal in its efficiency. Subject 73, Mara Chen, age 16, genetic profile compatible, family eliminated to ensure compliance. Modification protocol approved. Family eliminated. They killed her parents, Elara whispered. 3 weeks ago. Made it look like a car accident. Koss's jaw was tight. That's what they do, remove attachments. Make sure the subjects have nothing to go back to, no one to miss them. Like what he'd done to her, Elara thought. Not her family. She'd been alone already, isolated by choice and circumstance. But he'd removed her life just as thoroughly. The difference was, he'd let her live. So we saved her, she said, from becoming what we are. Yes. And tomorrow, next week, there are more facilities, more candidates, more people turning children into weapons. Yes. Koss's expression was grim. There will always be more. That's why the work never stops. Elara looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd spent 15 years fighting a war no one else knew existed. Who'd killed hundreds of people and saved dozens, and somehow kept functioning through the moral calculus of deciding who deserved to live and who deserved to die. This man who destroyed her life and was now offering her a purpose in the wreckage. I want to keep doing this, she said. Koss went very still. Elara. I want to help. Not just extractions. All of it. She held his gaze. You said there are more facilities, more people. I want to shut them down. I want to make sure what happened to us, what almost happened to Mara, stops happening. You don't know what you're asking. Yes, I do. Elara's hands clenched. I know exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking to become what you are. A monster who protects instead of preys. Someone who does terrible things for necessary reasons. I know, Koss. And I'm choosing it anyway. He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something complicated in his expression. Relief, maybe, or horror that she'd accepted this so quickly. Or both. This isn't a decision you can undo, he said quietly. Once you start down this path, once you kill your first person deliberately, not in the heat of combat, but because they need to die, you can't go back. You can't unknow what it feels like, what it costs. Like you can't undo what you did to me. Koss flinched. Yes, like that. Elara moved closer, closing the distance between them until she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, until she could feel the heat radiating from him, the same modified metabolism burning through his system. Then we're even, she said. You made me into this. Now I'm choosing to be this, on my own terms. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Koss's hand came up, cupping her face with unexpected gentleness. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and Elara's breath caught at the intimacy of the gesture. I don't want this for you, he whispered. I know. I wanted you to survive this better than I did, to stay human, to prove that the modifications don't have to destroy everyone. Maybe they don't. Elara covered his hand with hers. Maybe the difference is choosing to use them instead of being used by them. Maybe the difference is doing this together instead of alone. Kos's eyes searched hers, looking for, what, certainty? Sanity? Some sign that she wasn't as broken as he feared? Whatever he saw there, it made his shoulders sag slightly. Acceptance, maybe, or resignation. Together, he said finally. Together, Elara agreed. And when he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in something that felt almost like surrender, she let herself lean into him. Let herself take comfort from the only other person in the world who understood what it cost to be what they were. They stood there in the kitchen as dawn light filtered through the windows, two monsters holding each other, trying to remember how to be human. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even peace. But it was something. And for now that was enough. Later, hours later, when the sun was high and the city was fully awake, Kos showed her the rest. The real rest. Not just the facilities, and the candidates, and the public-facing war against genetic modification programs. The private war. The personal one. He led her back to the obsession room in his bedroom, to the walls covered in documentation and photographs. But this time, he pulled up files on his computer, showed her the complete picture. There were 47 subjects before me, he said, pulling up medical records. 46 died during modification, or shortly after. I survived because... He paused. Because I was too stubborn to die, or too broken to care if I lived. I still don't know which. He showed her the records, children mostly. Some teenagers. All of them chosen for genetic compatibility. All of them put through a process that killed them more often than not. Subject 1. Died during initial neural integration. Subject 12. Survived 6 weeks post-modification. Cause of death. Organ failure. Subject 23. Terminated after violent psychotic episode. Subject 47. Konstantin Wilder. Status. Survived. After me, they refined the process, Kos continued, made it more survivable. Started getting success rates above 50%. And then they started selling it. New files appeared, black market operations, underground facilities, rich people paying millions for modifications that would make them stronger, faster, better than human. Most of them died anyway, Kos said. The modifications don't work well on adults. Something about neuroplasticity, cellular regeneration rates. But they kept trying, kept selling, kept... He stopped, his jaw clenching. Kept making more of us, Elara finished. Yes. He pulled up one more file. This one recent, dated 3 months ago. It was a contract, a research agreement between several shell corporations and a private medical facility. For a new modification program, new subjects, new protocols designed to push the boundaries of what human bodies could become. And at the bottom, a list of names. Candidates. Mara Chen was number 17 on the list. Elara Voss was number 48. They've been building toward this for years, Kos said quietly, trying to restart the program at scale, create modified soldiers, enhanced operatives, living weapons they can control. I've been shutting down facilities as fast as I find them, but... There are always more, Elara said. Yes, he closed the file. Always more. That's what I've been trying to tell you. This war doesn't end. It just continues until either I'm dead or they run out of money and ambition. And they won't run out of either. Elara stared at the screen, at the evidence of a conspiracy so vast it should have been impossible, should have been science fiction. But it was real as the scars on her arms. How many are left, she asked, on that candidate list? Kos pulled up another file. Of the original 73, 42 are still in play. The others have been extracted, relocated, or, his voice went flat, terminated before we could reach them. 42 lives still at risk. 42 people who would become what Elara had become or die trying. Unless someone stopped it. "We're going to save them," Elara said. "Not a question." "We're going to try." Kos met her eyes. "But I need you to understand what that means. It means months of this. Maybe years. Facilities in different countries, different continents. Some extractions will be clean. Others will be like Chicago." Yes. Elara thought about Mara, safe now in that anonymous house. Thought about the guards they'd left behind, their blood still wet on that fire escape. Thought about the choice she was making, the path she was choosing. "I'm in," she said. Kos studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled up a new file, a dossier on a facility in Berlin. Subject 19, Viktor Petrov, age 14, he read. Scheduled for initial modification in 10 days. The facility is heavily guarded. Diplomatic immunity through a corrupt embassy connection. This won't be a simple extraction. What will it be? Kos's expression was grim. A massacre, probably. If we go in, we'll have to go hard. No witnesses, no survivors on their side. The words should have made her hesitate. They didn't. When do we leave? Elara asked. And Kos, this monster, this broken man who'd destroyed her life and was now offering her purpose in the wreckage, smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was dark, edged with something that might have been satisfaction or might have been grief. 3 days, he said. That gives us time to plan, to prepare, to make sure you're ready for what comes next. I'm ready now. No, he closed the laptop. You think you are, but trust me, Chicago was the easy one. Berlin will show you what this really costs, what you really have to become to do this work. Elara held his gaze. And if I can't? If I break? Then I'll carry you through it. His voice was quiet. Certain. The same way you're going to carry me when I break. Because this doesn't get easier, Elara. It just becomes survivable. And we survive it together. Together. That word again. It had become their anchor, their promise. The thing they held on to when everything else fell apart. Elara reached for his hand, and Kos took it, scarred palm against scarred palm. Mirror images bound by trauma and choice, and something neither of them had words for yet. Together, she said. Together, he echoed. And in the quiet of that moment, surrounded by evidence of horrors past and future, 2 monsters made a pact. They would save the others. All 42 candidates, if they could. They would burn down every facility, eliminate every threat, destroy every piece of the program that had destroyed them. They would do terrible things for necessary reasons. They would become what they had to become, and they would do it together, because that was the only way either of them was going to survive. Epilogue. 6 months later. The rooftop bar in Prague was exactly the kind of place that didn't ask questions. Expensive enough to keep out the desperate, exclusive enough that privacy was guaranteed, and high enough that the city spread below like a map of possibilities. Elara stood at the railing, a glass of something expensive and untouched in her hand, watching the sunset paint the spires gold. Behind her, Kos was finishing a call. Russian again. Always Russian when he was coordinating with the network. The web of safe houses and handlers and people who owed him favors or feared him enough to comply. It had grown in the past 6 months, expanded beyond what even he had imagined. Because they weren't alone anymore. Elara felt the presence before she heard the footsteps. Her modifications had refined themselves over the months, become more intuitive. She could read a room now without conscious thought. Identify threats and allies with the same instinctive accuracy Kos had always possessed. You're early, she said without turning. The woman who joined her at the railing was young, maybe 22, with burn scars running up her left arm in patterns Elara recognized all too well. Subject 31, real name, Sonia, extracted from a facility in Moscow 3 months ago. One of 6 they'd brought into the fold. 6 people who'd been candidates for modification, and had chosen, like Elara, to fight back instead of hide, Kos said you wanted to see me, Sonia said in accented English. Her eyes tracked the cityscape with the same hyper-awareness Elara had learned to live with. Is there news? Berlin facility is shut down, Elara confirmed. Victor made it out clean. He's with Anna now, starting fresh in Canada. Sonia's expression tightened. Victor had been her friend before. Two candidates held in the same facility, kept separate but aware of each other. She'd asked to be part of his extraction, but Kos had refused. Too personal, too risky. Elara had gone instead. That's good, Sonia said quietly. He deserves normal. He does. Elara took a sip of her drink finally. The alcohol burned, but the modifications processed it almost immediately. Another thing she'd had to adjust to. Never quite drunk, never quite sober, always balanced on that knife's edge. But that's not why I asked you here. She pulled up a file on her phone, passed it to Sonia. The younger woman's eyes widened as she read. Mexico City? New facility. Just came on our radar. Elara's voice was calm. Clinical. She'd learned that from Kos. How to deliver terrible news without flinching. They're not using the old candidate lists anymore. They're creating their own, kidnapping street kids, orphans, people no one will miss. How many? 12 that we know of. 3 already modified. 9 still candidates. Sonia's hands clenched around the phone. When? 2 weeks. Kos is coordinating with the network, but this is bigger than Chicago, bigger than Berlin. We'll need everyone. Everyone meant the 6. The small, growing team of people who'd been marked for modification and had chosen to become something else instead. Not quite heroes, not quite monsters, something in between. Sonia nodded slowly. I'm in. It won't be clean, Elara warned. The facility is in the middle of a populated area. Heavy security. Diplomatic complications. We go in, people die. Possibly civilians. I know. Sonia's voice was harder now. Colder. She'd changed in 3 months. The same way Elara had changed in 6. The same way everyone changed when they chose this life. But 12 kids, Elara. 12. I know. They stood in silence for a moment. 2 women who'd been made into weapons and had decided to aim themselves at the people who'd forged them. Does it get easier? Sonia asked quietly. The killing? Elara thought about Chicago, Berlin, the 6 other facilities they'd hit in between. The body count that she'd stopped tracking around 50 because the numbers stopped meaning anything. No, she said honestly. It gets survivable, that's all. Sonia nodded, like she'd expected that answer, like she was already learning to live with it. Kos appeared then, sliding an arm around Elara's waist with casual possession. 6 months, and they still hadn't defined what they were to each other. Partners. Soldiers. Something more complicated than either word could capture. He nodded to Sonia. Mexico City? She's in, Elara confirmed. Good. Victor's en route to the rendezvous point. Mikhail is already in the city. Yuki lands tomorrow. He pulled up his own phone, showing a map with markers. I have eyes on the facility. We'll have a 12-hour window when they move subjects for initial modification. That's when we hit them. Casualties? Sonia asked. Kos's expression was grim. High. But if we don't do this, 12 kids get turned into what we are, or they die trying. Those are the only options. It was the calculation they made every time, the moral math of deciding when killing was necessary, when the cost in blood was worth the lives saved. Elara had stopped questioning it around extraction number 8. Now she just did the work. We'll need a distraction, she said, studying the map. Something to pull security away from the main building. I'm working on it. Kos's hand tightened on her waist, just slightly. The only sign of tension in his otherwise perfect control. This one's gonna be ugly, Elara. They're all ugly. This one more than most. His eyes met hers, and she saw something there she didn't see often. Concern. Are you sure? Don't. She cut him off. Don't ask me if I'm sure. Not anymore. We're past that. Kos studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Past that. he agreed. Sonia excused herself, heading back inside to call the others. They'd all come. They always did. Because this was what they'd chosen. What they'd become. A family of monsters doing monstrous things for reasons they convinced themselves were right. When they were alone, Kos pulled Elara closer. His chin rested on top of her head, and she let herself lean into him. 6 months, and this was still the only place she felt steady. The only person who understood. 42 candidates on the original list, he said quietly. We've extracted or relocated 27. 12 terminated before we could reach them. 3 still at large, locations unknown. And now 12 more in Mexico City. They're not stopping, Elara. Every facility we shut down, 2 more pop up. Every program we destroy, the research gets sold to someone else. We're not winning this war, we're just surviving it, Elara finished. I know. Is that enough? For you? She thought about Mara, safe somewhere with a new name and a normal life. Thought about Victor, headed toward the same. Thought about all the people who would never know what they'd been saved from, because Elara and Kos had been willing to get blood on their hands. It has to be, she said. Kos's arms tightened around her. I never wanted this for you. I know that too. Elara turned in his embrace, looking up at him. This man who'd destroyed her life and given her purpose, who'd turned her into a monster and then stood beside her while they both learned what that meant. But you don't get to decide what I want anymore. I made my choice. I keep making it. Every extraction, every facility, every time I pull the trigger. Any regrets? Elara thought about the person she'd been 6 months ago. The translator, who'd lived small, stayed invisible, tried desperately not to be noticed. The woman who'd woken up violated and terrified in a sterile room. That person was gone, dead, mourned and buried. What stood in her place was something new, something dangerous, something that could do terrible things and sleep at night because those terrible things saved lives. Only one, she said. Kos's expression tightened. What? Elara reached up, her scarred hand cupping his face. That it took me so long to stop fighting you and start fighting with you. Something in his eyes cracked. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or just the simple, terrible understanding that they were both too broken to be anything other than what they'd become. He kissed her then, not gentle, not soft, but desperate and claiming and achingly familiar. 6 months of this dance. 6 months of being partners and soldiers, and something neither of them had words for. 6 months of learning that monsters could still feel. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had fully set. Prague glittered below them, beautiful and oblivious. Somewhere in that city, people were living normal lives, going home to families, complaining about traffic, worrying about mundane things. Elara and Kos would never be those people again, but they'd save some of them, would save more tomorrow, next week, next month. Would keep fighting this war that never ended because the alternative was letting more children get turned into weapons. Mexico City in 2 weeks, Kos said, returning to business, always returning to business. It was how he survived. Treating each mission as a problem to solve, each life as a calculation to make. I'll need you to run point on reconnaissance. Your Spanish is better than mine. Done. Elara's mind was already shifting, planning, preparing. It was easier than feeling. What about the 3 candidates still at large? Working on it. Kos pulled up his phone again, showing her a map with red markers scattered across Eastern Europe. I have leads in Budapest and Warsaw. The 3rd is a ghost. Haven't found a trace in 4 months. We'll find them. We'll try. He pocketed the phone. But the priority is Mexico City. 12 lives we can definitely save versus 3 we might not be able to find. The moral calculus again. Always the math. Always the choice. Elara nodded. Mexico City first, then we hunt the ghosts. Together. Together, she echoed. They stood there on that rooftop as night fell fully. 2 modified humans, watching a normal city live its normal life. Two monsters who'd chosen each other not because they were healed, but because they were broken in the same way. And in 2 weeks they'd go to Mexico City. They'd kill people who probably deserved it. They'd save children who definitely didn't deserve what was about to happen to them. They'd get blood on their hands and sleep beside each other anyway, because that's what monsters did when they decided to be monsters together. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was their ending. And as Elara felt Kos's hand find hers in the darkness, as she felt the familiar spark of their matching modifications recognizing each other, she realized something. She didn't want a different ending. This war, this purpose, this man beside her who understood the cost, this was enough. Not because it was right, but because it was survivable. And they were surviving it together. Below them, Prague glittered. Above them, stars emerged. And between them, two monsters who'd learned that sometimes salvation looked like damnation, and the only way through was side by side. Elara squeezed Kos's hand. He squeezed back. And somewhere in Mexico City, 12 children who would never know their names slept on, unaware that two broken people were coming to save them, or die trying. The end.